Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, also known as Fire Emblem 4, has a special challenge where the player has to play the whole game while meeting certain strict criteria across 4 categories. These categories are tactics, experience, survival, and combat, and getting an A rank in each results in an overall A rank for the whole game. I decided to do this challenge, but I chose not to look up strategies that other people have done for this challenge, and only use information about game mechanics, including maps, events, character data, and enemy data. This video is going to review what goes into the challenge, and will cover all the strategy considerations I came up with. This is all for creating a route without cheats, speed-ups, or save states during real-time play. The real deal. I take this sort of challenge seriously and have the most fun when trying to do it earnestly and honestly. Fire Emblem 4 came out in 1996 in Japan and was never localized officially. Thanks to the great work of Project Naga, a very thorough English fan translation exists for this game now. For the less familiar, Fire Emblem 4 takes place over 12 chapters and is known for its large, warlike campaigns, where one chapter is the equivalent to multiple chapters in successor Fire Emblem games after this one. This game is split into 2 generations, where you play as a set of characters for 6 maps, then effectively reset your party and do the final 6 maps. No matter how you play this game, challenge or not, there are serious implications for how Generation 1 impacts Generation 2, but it will be especially important for this challenge to plan between generations. In order to get a combined total A rank, which is awarded at the end of the game, the player has to meet 4 criteria, which each have their own rank. The first one is the tactics criteria. In order to get an A rank in tactics, the game must be completed in 400 turns or less. Over the course of 12 chapters, that averages out to about 33 turns each. Some chapters are shorter by nature, while others like Chapter 2 and Chapter 7 are massive. Later, chapters tend to be a little shorter on average because of how many more options the player has for setups and techniques to save turns. Another aspect of the tactics rank is that the player must never lose control of an allied castle, so the player always has to guard castles that might be in danger. The second ranking criteria is experience. The player has to get 1,000 level ups over the course of the game. That sounds like a massive number, and yeah, it is. There are 47 characters in the game, 24 in each of the 2 generations, except for one shared character, our absolute boy, Finn. This averages out to be 21 level ups over the course of the game. The implication of this is that basically all characters must be used extensively. None of that semi-standard Fire Emblem playstyle where you beef up one character and let them steamroll the game. Everyone has to participate. The arena will get heavy use to boost levels, but characters must engage in each chapter in a meaningful, balanced way to get levels. The third criteria is survival. Survival has 2 parts to it. All characters must be recruited as part of the playthrough, and none of those characters can be killed before the end of the game. This is pretty straightforward, but a character can technically die and be revived with the Valkyrie staff, and it will not negatively impact this rank. The fourth and last criteria is combat. Combat doesn't really have much to do with actual combat per se, but in order to get an A rank, your characters must not have had more than 3 combined losses over the course of the game. A loss is different than a death. When a character is defeated in the game, they are both defeated and record a loss that is recorded on the save file. Meaning, if you reload the game at the turn you're on, that loss will still be present. So you are allowed up to 3 of these scenarios before you lose the rank. Importantly, you can restart an entire chapter to truly reload your losses up until that point, so if your chapter attempt gets out of hand on losses, you can at least get back to where you last were. But realistically, for a real-time attempt of this challenge without save states or any of that cheater crap, you have to develop strategies that minimize your risk of losing characters, or else you'll be redoing the whole chapter, including all the arena grinding we'll be talking about soon. Alright, so what does all that mean? Well, survival and combat are pretty intuitive. You need to beat the game while getting all characters and not have anyone die, which is pretty easy to both understand and to route around. The real sauce of this challenge has to do with the first 2, tactics and experience. In short, minimizing the amount of turns it takes to run through the game while maximizing the amount of experience you get is where the real challenge is. Some people who've played a Fire Emblem game before knows how nice it is to beef up one character and let them run through the game effortlessly, and how fast you can clear some maps. And as an alternative playstyle, some people like to take their time and figure out ways to farm experience so their whole team is overall extremely strong, no matter how many turns it takes. So striking a balance between making a high-level army while completing the game quickly is ultimately the challenge here, and there's a lot that goes into making it all work. To reiterate, I did this challenge on my own without looking up other people's strats. I come from a speedrun background, and all too common do I see people just pull up someone else's video and copy strats without thinking about it much. I wanted to do this on my own and see what I could do, and to be very fair, I still had access to all the information you could want about the game itself, including character growth rates, map details, and more. I can't imagine what it'd be like to play this game back in 1996 without guides trying to do this. But importantly, I specifically was not referring to other ranked playthrough strategies. I'm sure some FE4 veterans out there might think my strategies to be slow, bad, or inefficient, but guess what? Too bad. What's cool about this challenge is that you either do it or you don't, so it's all viable if it makes it an A rank. With all that, it's a daunting consideration to route this. Where do you even begin? Well, the short answer is that I played Generation 1 a few times, getting a feel for how to tackle the game. I would try a few things out, see which characters would fall behind, like our friend Arden sitting at base at level 6 for 6 chapters and think, hey, maybe there's something better I can do for him. And eventually I got a feel for how to work on optimizing experience and turn counts. So let's get into it. The next few sections of the video are going to cover in depth how the game works and the major mechanics the player has to consider in order to do the challenge. First, we'll look at skills. In Fire Emblem 4, characters have skills that influence the way they play. Here's a list of all the skills in the game and their various effects. A few notable ones include Pursuit, which allows the character to double an enemy, akin to how it works in successor Fire Emblem games based on having 4 or more attack speed. In this game, if your character's attack speed is 1 or more than the enemy's, and they have the Pursuit ability, that character will double them. Pursuit is an incredibly valuable ability, arguably the most important. Critical is another fantastic ability, which enables critical hits at all, and has major implications for weapon usage that we'll talk about later. Paragon allows double experience points on most combat actions, which you can imagine is exceptionally helpful for the experience ranking criteria. Almost all abilities are useful in their own way, and also sometimes very difficult to face against when enemies have them, most notably Critical and Nihil. Before we do some unit review, in Fire Emblem 4, units have a max level of 30, and units promote at level 20 earliest and retain their levels. Unlike some other Fire Emblem games, there's no reason not to promote as soon as possible, which is done at home base. So, each character comes with their own abilities, and the combination of characters' abilities and their class dictate their playstyle. Like the game itself, the units between Generation 1 and 2 are split. Let's take a look at the units of Generation 1 and review their qualities. We'll review Generation 2 units later. Here are all the units of Generation 1 and their skills and growths, with Holy Blood factor in, which gives some units higher growths. Now, if you're a player of later Fire Emblem games, you might despair looking at some of these growth rates, and yep, that's Fire Emblem 4, get used to it. Why does the Thief Do have the same defense growth as Armor Knight Arden and more strength growth than the Sword Fighter Holin? Who knows, man. Let's start with a basic example of Noish and Alec, the Christmas calves of this game. Noish has a bit more HP and strength, and Alec has a little more skill and speed. And if we look at their abilities, Alec has access to Pursuit, which lets him double enemies if he's faster, and Noish has Critical, which lets him do big damage occasionally. Combined with Alec's weaker weapon, the Iron Sword, compared to Noish's Steel Sword, Alec's playstyle is generally to poke at enemies multiple times, especially enemies with a smaller defense stat, and Noish will come in with a bigger single hit. Some of this might be very obvious, but as part of trying to optimize getting experience, factoring in their abilities and playstyle has huge implications for this ranked playthrough. Looking at all the units, we can put them into some groups. First is Sigurd, who belongs to his own group. Sigurd is the only character that can seize castles, which is how the player advances the game. Sigurd has excellent growth rates and is generally known for being the all-around Fire Emblem Chad. Even though the player wants to have a balanced party, it does make a lot of sense to make sure Sigurd gets early levels so that he can keep the turn count low. So Sigurd will be getting big experience points from defeating bosses so he can seize castles, and will be running around and poking enemies so that other party members can get experience for defeating them. Thankfully in Generation 1, many bosses are axe wielders, and Sigurd gets a silver sword in the prologue so that he gets access to pretty much all he needs. He's very easy to use, and his only drawback is a low resistance stat and growth, but there aren't many mages in Generation 1 anyways. The last thing to discuss about Sigurd is his authority stars. He gets 2 authority stars, which boosts the hit and evade rates of all allies within 3 tiles by 10%, which sometimes can make a big difference. The next group of units are the mounted units. They'll be out in the front lines most of the time. They have between 8 and 9 move, which compounds on the road terrain to travel huge distances. Very importantly, Kanto in this game allows mounted units to move after taking an action, and combined with their higher movement ability, the player can play very flexibly and allow openings for other units after fighting battles. They'll be on the front lines most of the time, and they'll be able to fairly easily get experience and keep up with Sigurd. Noish, Alec, Lex, Midir, and Beowulf have varying skills that help them grow. 3 of them have Pursuit, Lex has Paragon. Noish is a little difficult to manage sometimes, but if he keeps up with strength growths, he can reliably hit armored units well. Quan, Finn, and Ethlin all leave at the end of Chapter 3. Quan and Finn here both can keep up with Sigurd's movement, and especially in Chapters 2 and 3, they'll need to over-index on gaining experience. We'll talk about it more in the Chapter 2 section, but for my route I needed some of these units to specifically gain defense regularly to make my strategies work, especially for Quan in Chapter 3. Now let's talk about this group of physical infantry units, those that are not mounted. These are some of the harder units to work with in the game, because their movement is not great and they don't get Kanto. In the cases of Ira, Jamke, Holin, and Brigid, they come with very good bases and can hold their own easily. The mounted units can poke and weaken enemies, and these units can come in and secure kills for experience, or just simply do it on their own. Arden, my baby boy, has a hard time contributing. His 5 move and overall lack of killer instinct with only the Vantage ability makes him very difficult to use effectively. Unfortunately, even his base defense stat is not very good, but getting some defense on level up can make him usable. In my testing, it's worth re-rolling his level ups occasionally. And here are the mage units. Azel is an interesting case. He's very held back by his 5 move, but being a mage in Generation 1 can be incredibly valuable, since the majority of enemy units have little to no resistance. My current strategy is to give Azel the speed ring from the prologue, so that he is not weighed down by his fire tome and can sustainably double enemies, especially in the arena. It's worth noting that Azel's promotion to Mage Knight is incredible for him, so if you can hang in there and get him to level 20, he gets a massive glow up. Lewin comes in Chapter 2 and comes with +1 move over Azel and an incredible speed stat and growth, so he has less problems than Azel does early on, and once he gets Forseti in Chapter 4 he can easily sustain himself, even without Pursuit. Tilchu definitely requires a very specific setup to get going. At first I was in despair about how to effectively raise Tilchu, because she joins near the end of Chapter 3 at level 3. But a combination of the Paragon Ring plus sending her to the arena before ending Chapter 3 was the key to getting her going. She has arguably more problems than Azel since she doesn't have Pursuit, but her Thoron Tome is incredible with her Wrath ability. Let's talk about healers. In order to get these units levels, they need to do a variety of strategies. In general, when moving around the map, any turn that a healer is not healing any other unit is wasted experience, especially for Ethlin in the early chapters. So sometimes it's important to intentionally take damage, or take damage from the arena, to make sure that healers have something to heal. Here are the experience points awarded for stabs in this game, and you can see how some of them can yield lots of experience, however some are very expensive to repair. Warp is particularly great in the early game for experience. Ethlin needs to use the mend and return stabs aggressively almost every turn she can, but she also gets access to the Light Brand in Chapter 2, which lets her do magic damage to some of the beefier bosses in Chapter 2 and 3. Deirdre and Ideen have at least B rank in stabs, which lets them use Warp. Deirdre leaves early on in Chapter 3, so for pretty much the entire Chapter 2 segment she'll be using Warp to get a ton of levels from home base, and Ideen will use it in Chapters 3 onward to eventually hit her max level. Lachesis is the hardest healing unit to get going because of her low movement and low staff rank, so she especially needs to be healing every turn she can or contributing in combat. Her ability Charm is worth calling out, which adds 10% to hit and evade rates for all allies within 3 spaces, which is a big deal. Lachesis also gets access to arguably the best promotion in the game, Master Knight, which gives her much more movement and access to almost every weapon, so pushing her to get there is important. Claw joins late, but with the Warp and Fortify stabs, he can fairly easily get to max level. We have 2 units left. Sylvia is the dancer of this game, and Sylvia's dance allows up to 4 units surrounding her to get another turn. In a game with Kanto, where you can reposition your units around Sylvia after taking their own actions, and then have Sylvia give all 4 units another turn, it can be massively beneficial. Despite that, Sylvia has a hard time getting experience because dance only awards 10 EXP per use, and there really isn't a great way to get her experience that I found. She can use C-rank swords, but she's not exactly built for combat either. This unit was one where I sacrificed some levels in order to keep the turn count lower. And finally, we have Du, probably the most difficult character to utilize for this challenge. Du is a thief and has the important ability Steal, which means when he attacks enemies in combat, he will steal their gold. Every enemy in the game has some amount of gold that can be stolen, and sometimes it's more than you think. Du has a high evasion stat, but he generally doesn't want to be in combat, but in order to get gold from enemies, he has to fight. Du's best method for safely farming enemies is to use one of the 1-2 range sword weapons like the bolt sword or light brand, which very nicely lets him steal gold without being directly hit or in danger, especially in Chapter 3's Orga Hill Pirates section. Du also has the unique ability to give gold to any ally character he wants, where most units must be paired for that to happen. He also gets the bargain ability, which can be beneficial for buying things from the shop at a discount. I also plan to have less levels on Du than the other units, but he will get a few levels from rescuing the villagers in Chapter 4. This is a good segue into gold management, which is a huge part of playing this game with this challenge. Let's first discuss a few mechanics. Ally units cannot trade weapons in this game, which is a nicety that many other Fire Emblem games have. If Unit A wants to get a weapon that Unit B has, Unit B can sell it to the pawnbroker at an allied castle, then Unit A can buy it. This has huge gold routing implications, and it takes getting used to, but with some planning it's not too bad. Sometimes units will get rings from enemy drops in villages just to sell them for their money. Like mentioned before, only thieves and paired units can transfer money between each other, and it uses an action for that turn. Gold is used for 2 things, to repair weapons and to buy items from the pawnbroker or the armory. Let's review how you get gold in this game. One of the primary ways is to visit villages, where villages begin by having 5,000 gold available. Bandits will appear and start to destroy the villages, and they lose 500 gold per turn this way. Villages also sometimes have items in them, and as long as the village isn't destroyed entirely, the visiting character will get the gold and the item. Next is the steal method, which as described with Du earlier, is performed by having the steal ability and attacking an enemy. Du gives Lachesis the Thief Sword in Chapter 2, which is a weak weapon that yields the steal ability in the same way, which can be very useful for picking up some extra gold. In Generation 2, Chapter 8, the Thief Ring can be acquired to award the steal ability, but it's a little late in the game to be as useful as the first 2 methods. Du in particular will be spending many actions trying to get money from enemies. Most pirates and brigands in the game, the ones that hunt and destroy villages, have 5,000 gold each, which is quite a lot. Another way of getting gold is from the arena, which we'll cover in another section more in depth, but clearing the arena can award a unit up to 17,500 gold per chapter, which is incredibly important. Getting your unit strong enough to consistently clear the arena is a huge part of the challenge, and even falling a bit short of clearing the arena can snowball into money problems. Units have a maximum of 50,000 gold. Sometimes there are efficiencies with transferring money and the gold limit. For example, let's say Du has 30,000 gold and he wants to transfer 20,000 gold to Ideen, but not anymore. If Du were to transfer his gold to her, she'd get all 30,000 gold and be left with none to give the other units. But let's say Finn has 40,000 gold already. If Du spends one turn giving 10,000 gold to Finn, he'll be left with 20,000 gold, and then on another turn, Du can give the remaining 20,000 to Ideen. Money can be difficult to transfer in general, and the way money is passed around is not the same every playthrough, so some strategies like this are important to consider. So what are the major implications of managing gold well? The most important by far is management of the Paragon Ring, which is acquired from Vorts in Chapter 2. As described earlier, Paragon doubles the experience awarded from most combat actions, which is naturally an incredibly good skill for this challenge. As much as possible, once allied units have enough money to buy the Paragon Ring from the pawnbroker, they should. At the beginning of every chapter when possible, buying the Paragon Ring then full clearing the arena can yield many levels. Well, that sounds great, what's the catch? The catch is that the Paragon Ring costs 40,000 gold, which is a monstrous amount of gold, 80% of a character's max gold. so realistically it takes a while before units can start doing this. But let's consider the scenario for being able to buy the Paragon Ring. Let's say Ira gets to the beginning of a chapter and does have 40,000 gold. If she buys the Paragon Ring, she'll go to 0 gold. Then, assuming she can full clear the arena, she'll get 17,500 gold. Then, she sells the Paragon Ring for 20,000, and that puts her back up to 37,500. So the net difference is negative 2,500. As long as the player can keep up with this minor deficit, units that have around 40,000 gold and can clear the arena can fairly consistently keep buying and selling the Paragon Ring. This might single-handedly be the most important overall strategy for this rank challenge because it enables the party to consistently gain level ups and money. Another mechanic to discuss briefly is the save mechanic. It sounds like a menial part of the game, but it's very important to understand how saving and loading works with respect to the rank challenge. The player has access to 4 save slots. At the beginning of every turn, the player has the ability to save the game and freely reload from that turn whenever they want, which is hugely different from successor Fire Emblem games. The player can only save when they haven't taken any actions, which is an important distinction. However, unlike successor Fire Emblem games, there is no method to restart a chapter, meaning that the player has to manage their saves carefully, and if they aren't on top of save management, they could wind up in an unwinnable situation for their entire playthrough and be forced to start over. For this challenge, because of the aforementioned combat rank and making sure that unit losses don't add up, making a save at the beginning of every chapter and not saving over it is very important. We're talking about the arena next, but a critically important aspect of the save system is that doing many things in the castle area, including the arena and shopping, don't technically quote-unquote take actions, so the player can freely do these things and still be able to save the game. The arena is available at the beginning of most chapters in this game, all of them except for the Prologue and Chapter 6. The arena has 8 enemies and award both experience and gold for clearing per chapter. Arena enemies are not random, they are fought in order per allied unit. It's very important to defeat arena enemies as much as possible. When using the arena in this game, each unit will fight an enemy in combat. If they win, they move on to the next round, and importantly, they get their HP restored to max. However, if they lose, their HP is set to 1 HP. Losing in the arena does not count as a death or a loss, so it does not negatively affect the player ranks whatsoever, thank goodness. Winning the arena consistently means your character can steamroll and keep getting healed, but losing even one battle will set your health to 1, and in most situations the player will have to use a healer's action to heal them. The way around this is to use the aforementioned system of saving while using the arena and reloading if things don't go well. For example, let's say Lex is fighting in the arena in Chapter 2, fights a few battles and is winning. Then he makes it to round 4, which is Barknin the sword fighter, and Lex as an axe fighter can't overcome him due to the weapon triangle. If the player saves between every arena battle, they can freely reload the game if Lex were to lose to Barknin and be set at 1 HP. We'll talk about randomness and how RNG works in this game soon, but the important part of the arena is managing health of units. In general, if units are generally doing well and they have the right weapons, they can clear the arena. Like mentioned before with Lex, some units will have a hard time working against the weapon triangle, but for the most part units can clear the arena once they get going on their levels. RNG, which stands for Random Number Generator or Generation, refers to randomness. In Fire Emblem 4, randomness does not change per frame and is mostly called only when something needs to call for a random number. RNG is stored as a 3-byte address at 0004A1 in memory. RNG is also saved with a save file, meaning that reloading a file and doing the same exact actions will replicate the same scenario. The implication is that if you really wanted to, you could perfectly plan the entire playthrough to be RNG manipulated to get exactly the outcome you want, but naturally that's not part of this challenge I'm doing. There are some video playlists out there of this game and many other games with similar RNG that do this, but of course, they don't make it obvious to you so that you, the viewer, are left in the dark. However, there very much are implications for how it affects someone's playthrough no matter how you play this game. You can't avoid it, and restarting turns is a very reasonable way to play this game. A major aspect of considering RNG for player strategies is that you can use this knowledge to juice wins and or level ups in the arena. Because of the aforementioned save system, the player can save the game freely at the beginning of a turn while using the arena. You can get a unit to be close to leveling up, have them fight in the arena, and if they get a garbage level up, you can reload the game, have a different character fight in the arena to change RNG, save the game, then rinse and repeat until you get a favorable outcome. Similarly, you can use this technique to get a favorable outcome at the beginning of a turn while on a map. For example, in Chapter 1, it is massively beneficial for my strategies to have Quan land a 50% javelin against the commander guarding Genoa. So I will save the game at the start of the turn, and if Quan misses that attack, I have the option to restart the turn from a load, do something else to change the RNG, and then try again. Whether or not you agree or disagree with RNG tech is up to you. You can consider the alternative, where if you play with unfavorable outcomes and start to get losses on your units, your rank will fall and you have to restart chapters or even the whole game. The reality is that some of this RNG tech isn't going to make bad strategies work. You absolutely need to plan and play well regardless of RNG tech in order to do this challenge. It's mostly for a smoother ride and not wasting your time. My personal stance is that it feels pretty natural in this game to be able to restart a turn or an arena battle without fully scripting out entire scenarios, which only really would be feasible if you did it from the very start of the game. And to be clear, this is all using tech that is available in the game. No save states or emulator tools, none of that cheater crap. It's all freely available based on what's given to you as a system mechanic. But in my mind, it's silly and possibly negligent to pretend like RNG implications don't exist, especially for a challenge like this. As an extension of the RNG discussion, let's talk about level ups for this challenge. As shown before, every character has their own growth rates, and getting generally good level ups is very nice for this challenge, naturally. But something I like about Fire Emblem 4 is that there isn't so much of an emphasis on character stats in this game. Generally, units can ride off their bases for a long time, and promotion bonuses tend to be pretty good. Weapons are strong, and both allies and enemies have a lot of HP compared to successor Fire Emblem games. Imagine going from Bata the Beast, the first boss in Fire Emblem 7, with a measly 21 HP, to your boy DiMaggio in Fire Emblem 4 having a rock-solid 45 HP. You get a ton of value out of trading weapons and optimizing loadouts for units, like the massive glow-up that Midir gets from taking Jomki's killer bow. That being said, good level ups absolutely can matter. In particular for my strategies, I specifically need Quan, Lex, and Sigurd to get some points of defense in order to keep up with the game. Thankfully, they all have decent defense growths, but things get really bad if they don't get the growths. While doing their arena segments, I will most certainly reload sometimes to get a better level up. Some other examples include Deirdre getting enough magic in Chapter 2 to be able to one-shot some of the arena fighters, and Erin getting at least a little bit of defense and strength so she doesn't get wrecked by a rogue hit from an axe brigand. Generation 2 has a bunch of units where some early defense level ups can really save them, and there are some other situations to look out for, including monitoring Selif's speed growth. But for the most part, units don't really have to get optimal level ups at all. Despair does set in when Arden's HP only goes up for multiple levels though. It's time to talk about this game's selling point, the pairing system, or the love system. It's an incredibly important system to understand for routing this challenge. Let's start from the top. There are 9 female units in Generation 1. Ethlyn and Quan are paired from the start, and Sigurd and Deirdre are automatically paired in Chapter 1. The remaining 7 units all have the potential to be paired with any of the other available male units. When a female unit is paired, a few things happen. They will have 2 children that will be playable units and will pass down all personal skills, stats, and weapons. It's a rather complex system, but let's go through an example and try to keep the description brief. Let's use the example of Ira and Lex, who are paired as part of my strategy. Ira has 3 skills: Pursuit, Nihil, and Astra. Pursuit is a class skill, meaning it's associated with the Myrmidon class, so she won't pass that down, but she will pass down Nihil and Astra. Lex comes with Advantage and Paragon skills and will pass down both. Ira has Minor Odo Holy Blood, and Lex has Minor Near Holy Blood, which both get passed down and will help their children's growth rates. Also, the parents pass down their actual stats to influence what the children's starting base stats through a complex formula, but there is some influence. With a few exceptions, the male father passes down any viable weapons to the son and the mother to the daughter. In this case, the children are Larse and Ulster, who are both sword fighters and can only wield A-rank swords. So Ira can pass down all of her weapons to Larse, since they have the same weapon ranks of A-rank swords. But Lex cannot pass down his weapons because Lex wields axes and Ulster wields swords. So at the beginning of Generation 2, Larce will have a ton of swords and Ulster will sadly have a default weapon. Lex can possibly get a silver blade in his inventory if he defeats Chagall in Chapter 3, but otherwise he can't buy swords and can't place them in his inventory. So let's look at the children units. We see that Larce and Ulster have growth rates that are representative of their parents. Lex passes down his Near Holy Blood, which boosts HP and defense growths, and Ira passes down her Odo Holy Blood, passing down HP and skill growths. They have the skills Nihil, Astra, Vantage, and Paragon, all of which are incredibly useful, and because they are Myrmidons, they have the Pursuit ability as class skills. So overall, these two units are cracked and extremely reliable, especially in the early parts of Generation 2. How units are paired is a fairly simple to understand process that has a lot of caveats. Generally, as turns advance, units will gain love points at a specified rate based on the combination, and when they reach a value of 500, those units will be paired. Looking at this chart, we can see Ira and Lex reports 0 plus 2. 0 plus 2 here means that when Ira joins the team, she has a starting value of 0 and will passively gain 2 love points per turn with Lex. In her case, this would take 250 turns, which is very slow. However, if units end a turn standing next to each other, they will gain a +5 bonus, and if Lex and Ira stand next to each other every turn, it would take about 72 turns, which is much better. As part of playing the game, they won't be next to each other every turn, but planning around them being paired and making sure that they do stand next to each other over the course of Generation 1, giving them every chance they get, is very important. Another simple mechanic that influences love growths are events. For example, when Lex talks to Ira in Chapter 3 and gives her the Brave Sword, that conversation yields them plus 100 love points. Planning around available events like these helps pairings tremendously. Both paired units and sibling units have an additional chance to critical hit when standing next to each other. Ethlyn and Quan using this in the early parts of Generation 1 can be very valuable, and in the above example, Larce and Ulster can hang out next to each other and do massive damage on enemy phase. In sum, this is how you create custom units for Generation 2, and is one of the most fun mechanics in any Fire Emblem game in my opinion. You put in a lot of effort and work to set up your units for Generation 2, and you can get some massive rewards. Some setups are incredibly good, like pairing Tilchu with Luin so that Arthur inherits Forseti Holy Blood and can wield the Forseti Tome and almost solo the game. For my strategies, I did not do this, since that pairing takes many turns. You can similarly use the pairing system in Generation 2, but it is not nearly as impactful for the rank strategy, as most of the Generation 2 pairings take many turns and the benefits are minimal. If any of the female units from Generation don't get paired, the children that they would have had will be replaced with substitute units. Let's continue the example and look at the substitute units for Ira and Lex if they weren't paired. Creedne would replace Larce and Dalvin would replace Ulster. These units aren't really bad per se, and they have growths pretty similar to many Generation 1 units. But if you compare them to the Larce and Ulster we talked about before, they aren't even close. Very importantly, they have a fraction of the skills that the paired units get, and particularly important for Larce and Ulster, they get access to Paragon from Lex, which hands down makes them better for the ranked playthrough. So, pairing units in Generation 1 will yield better units for Generation 2. Some of the substitute units are still pretty cool. I think Hawk has a fan club out there. But wait. What if I were to tell you that there is one case where the substitute units were better? It's true, Lelia and Charlo, who are replacement units for Sylvia's children Lean and Corpor, have a very unique benefit over their paired counterparts for the strategies I came up with. The reason doesn't have to do with their stats or passing down weapons, it's simply that these two units happen to come with the Paragon skill for whatever reason, which is especially good for Charlo since he joins at level 1 very late into the game. Although it would be nice to pair Sylvia with someone like Claude for the Valkyrie staff or Corpor, it's not really important. Unfortunately, Paragon does not work with Lelia's dance ability for whatever reason, which is a shame, but these are not combat units so their growth rates don't really matter, and it's just about getting them levels for the rank. What does this mean in practice? Well, it means our girl Sylvia will not be getting paired. Tragic, really. Actually, if we refer back to the love growth rates, you can see that Sylvia is actually somewhat challenging to end up not paired, because she has both high starting value and high growth with Lune. So it forced me to pair Lune with Aaron, which in itself is a fairly easy pairing to get, but the clock is ticking. On that note, let's talk about all the Generation 1 pairings I came up with. We covered Lex and Ira, which passed down a number of skills including the helpful Paragon skill. The other considerations for Ira were Holen, who can pass down the very helpful Luna ability, and Noish, who could pass down the critical and accost abilities, but ultimately these were always going to take a backseat to the Paragon ability. If Lex were to be paired elsewhere for Paragon on other units, these two could be considered, but realistically Paragon on the first units you get in Generation 2 is too good to pass up. Next is Ideen and Midir, which is a very easy pairing to get. This pairing specifically passes down Pursuit to both children, which are Lester and Lana, and also is a great pairing because Midir can pass his Brave Bow down to Lester, and Ideen can pass her staves down to Lana. This is a good example of the parents having the exact same matching class of the children, so there's a lot of obvious synergy. Jomki comes with a great adept and accost abilities and better growths, but sadly he does not pass down Pursuit, which is a big deal for Lester specifically. Next is Lachesis' pairing, which I chose Beowulf, which is kind of a lore canon pairing. I would say that Lachesis' pairing isn't super important as the others, but Beowulf nicely passes down Pursuit. You could choose among other Pursuit users that are somewhat physically inclined on their stat growths, but Beowulf is particularly nice because they have an event in Chapter 2 that sets Beowulf ahead of the others, and I specifically give Beowulf the bargain band in Chapter 2, which halves all shopping costs, and he passes that down to Dermot. Similar to Ideen and Lana, Lachesis passes down most of her inventory directly to Nana without issue. Aaron is paired with Luin, which is yet another obvious lore canon pairing. I thought very hard about Arthur getting the Forseti, which requires pairing Luin with Tilchu, but ultimately my strategies relied mostly on Seliph in Generation 2 anyways, and the benefits weren't nearly as good as other synergies from having Aaron and Luin together. As mentioned before, Sylvia getting paired with Luin is a concern, so making sure Aaron and Luin have a special event in Chapter 4 to guarantee their pairing is the way to go. Aaron passes down Pursuit and Luin passes down Critical and Adept, and together those skills make the children out of control good. Sed comes with Forseti and basically needs no investment or attention in Generation 2, and Fee joins early in Generation 2 and can receive most of Aaron's weapons. Tilchu ends up getting paired with Azel, which gives their children some very powerful magic capabilities. Azel passes down Pursuit, Tilchu passes down the very cool Wrath ability, and their growths are great for mages. Similar to the others above, they pass down weapons easily. There wasn't much deliberation here. Passing down Pursuit is extremely helpful for mage units, and there's only real one choice. Azel comes with minor Fala Blood, which is perfect for Arthur and Tinny's magic growths. And finally, Bridget gets paired with Alec. This pairing I was pretty undecided on for a while, and in reality it doesn't matter all that much. Alec passes down Nihil, which helps Favel as an archer a little bit, but ultimately it wasn't super important in my routing. Bridget, like Ethlyn, is a rare case where Bridget passes down her inventory to her son instead of her daughter, and vice versa. So Bridget gives all her bows to Favel, which is automatic and easy to plan around. But Patty is a thief and only has access to C-rank swords, so having a father with swords to pass down is nice. I wanted to have Holen be their parent, but Bridget is generally pretty hard to pair, and unfortunately Bridget and Holen have among the worst love growths and starting points, so it'd likely waste a bunch of turns to have them paired. You could probably do it, but I decided to use Alec because he's a Kanto unit and it'd be easier to manage. It's very important to pass down a return ring to Patty for the beginning of Chapter 7, but anybody with money can do that. The units I didn't end up getting paired all have varying levels of viability. Claude passes down his Bragi Holy Blood, which is good for resistance growths, but only some units can get the Valkyrie staff to use, and he doesn't pass down any abilities. Dew was a hard one to pass up. Dew passes down the Bargain and Soul skills, which both are incredibly useful, especially Bargain for the Paragon band buying and selling we've talked about. Some combat units like Holen and Noish have great skills and could be swapped out in some cases, but these two specifically can't pass down Pursuit. It's also important to know that Luna and Soul are both sword skills, so a unit like Favel as an archer would not inherit it anyways. And finally Arden, well, that's for another Fire Emblem 4 challenge. Maybe a game modification where Arden fathers every single child and you play as the Arden army with Vantage. Another mechanic we should talk about is how weapons and items work in Fire Emblem 4. In many Fire Emblem games, weapons are much less permanent and more expendable, but in this game, a weapon has much more staying power. For example, the fantastic silver sword that Sigurd gets in the prologue stays around the entire game. It does not break and get removed from your inventory when all 50 uses are up. Instead, it does break, but this game has a blacksmith mechanic where he will repair the weapon for you, and the repair price is proportional to the weapon's gold value. In other words, stronger weapons cost more to repair. So acquiring as many weapons as possible is valuable, and part of the strategy for the rank challenge is to make sure certain units have certain weapons. For example, the iron sword in this game is pretty awful. It's fairly weak. Also, take note of its weapon weight, where attack speed in this game is your character's speed minus the weight of their weapon. The steel sword is a direct upgrade on damage, but its weight and accuracy is the same, so it's just straight up better. However, look at the slim sword. It does more damage than the iron sword and weighs less. If you played successor Fire Emblem games like the Game Boy Advance titles, you might expect slim swords and lances to be mostly used for units like Myrmidons and Pegasus Knights. But as part of my strategies, I gave Ethlin's slim sword to Arden, which lets him possibly double units when he gets the pursuit ring because of how light it is and how relatively strong it is. Before, I mentioned giving Midir the killer bow that Jamki has. Look at the staggering difference of stats between the iron bow and the killer bow. The killer bow is stronger, lighter, more accurate, and gives the critical skill. Jamki can get a steel bow relatively shortly after, and his stats are good enough to get by without needing the killer bow, so trading the killer bow to Midir is exactly what Midir needs to be a good unit. The weapon triangle in this game does exist, which gives plus 20 hit on advantage and minus 20 hit on disadvantage. There's a similar magic triangle, and dark magic beats each of the 3 triangle magic types, and then light magic beats all types of magic. A very important mechanic in this game is how the critical skill works, and how weapons can gain the critical skill. So first let's look at the formulas for critical hit rates. If a character doesn't have the critical skill either in their list of skills or on a weapon, then their critical rate is only affected by their pairing bonus, which is either granted by their lover or by a sibling, which is usually at a 20% rate, not bad. However, if the character does have the critical skill, then the formula changes drastically. Their critical hit rate is based on their current skill stat, plus their pairing bonus, plus the amount of weapon kills over 50. So, taking a brief look at the weapon kills part, every time a unit defeats an enemy, the weapon they are holding will get a number next to their stars on that weapon, which represents their weapon kills. And very importantly, when a weapon gets to 50 or more kills, that weapon automatically grants the critical skill, which takes any ordinary weapon and lets it utilize this second formula. So back to the formula with the critical skill, imagine a weapon has 50 weapon kills and just newly got the critical skill on it. The base critical rate for a unit with 20 skill would be 20%. But imagine that weapon had 70 kills and was standing next to a paired unit, it would jump to 60%. After a while, the critical rate can get so high that it becomes reliable to critical many times. You might be able to imagine the implications of this. Focusing a weapon to be used heavily to farm kills over the course of the game has huge benefits. One of the best weapons in the game, the Brave Sword, is used precisely this way. Take a look at the stats on this weapon. It has 100 accuracy, 12 strength, which is 2 less than the Silver Sword, has a very light weight of 3, and doubles every time it's used. It's a ridiculously good weapon. It's available in Chapter 3 for free as a part of a conversation with Lex or Holland with Ira, and when you get to 50 plus weapon kills on it, it becomes even better with a critical skill. The Brave weapons in this game are notoriously good, but the Brave Sword in particular stands out even more. Over the course of the game, units farming enemy kills with this weapon and passing it to Seliph in Chapter 6 is truly what makes Generation 2 go smoothly. But to be fair, because this is a ranked playthrough, there won't be many opportunities for weapons to get the critical skill through 50 plus kills, but if there's one you want, it's the Brave Sword, easily. We've talked about attack speed before, but this is a good segue into the ring section. I mentioned before how I gave Azel the speed ring in the prologue. The speed ring is one of many rings that gives a plus 5 boost to a stat. Let's look at Azel's case. He comes with some decent speed stats and growths, but look at the Fire Tome's weight, a staggering 12 weight, which is ridiculously heavy. At his base speed of 9, he is at a negative attack speed while using it. Thankfully, in the prologue, no enemies have pursuit and most enemies are slow and weighed down by their heavy axes. But pretty quickly Azel will not be able to double any units with pursuit because his attack speed is 0. Giving him the speed ring and getting at least a few speed growths on level up give him a real chance to double enemies, especially in the arena. You can definitely make arguments for other units getting the speed ring early on, even Sigurd, but what I'm showing you is the intricacies of how important rings can be. Here are all the rings in this game, which either give a direct stat boost, give a skill, or have a special effect. Like how the Knight Ring grants a unit the ability to Canto, which is to move after taking an action. They appear at different stages in the game, but again, because units can't freely trade inventory in this game, it's important to plan who gets what ring. Ultimately, some stat rings are more on the nice to have than necessary for units and their stats. An important part of acquiring rings in this game is that you can sell them for gold, which is a cash injection that some units sorely need. For example, in Chapter 6, Julia joins the team and generally has money problems, so I let her get the skill ring from a village, which she then sells in the next chapter to afford buying some staves from Lana. Later, if a character has extra money, they can buy the skill ring for 20,000 gold. Another example is the return ring, which lets a unit return to go back to base as an action. I found that this skill was not very useful in Generation 1, but in Generation 2 it has some nice uses, specifically to let Patty escape the desert in Chapter 7 on turn 2. One last disclaimer is that in line with not using any emulator tools to save state or anything like that, this is also a glitchless playthrough, so no cheaty glitches to help get an advantage. To be honest, this isn't really a major consideration in this game, but there is an infinite turns bug where you can use the rescue staff while someone is guarding a castle to give them infinite actions. And there's another oversight where male units can use the miracle sword, which is ordinarily only for female units, but we won't be exploiting any of those. There's a weird glitch where if you defeat the final boss with a mounted unit, you can massively mess up your ranks due to an oversight, so it's important to use an unmounted unit to defeat him safely. There's also some weirdness in this game if you've never reset the game once and keep playing, but that won't be relevant for this playthrough, which is going to be taking place on console. I believe Project Naga patches a fix for this, but in the original Japanese version, if you don't reset the game after starting Generation 2, Seliph has 2 authority stars instead of 3, but this is fixed by resetting at least once after that. That covers it for the major mechanics, so let's get into the chapter by chapter routing and decision making. We'll go through all of Generation 1, then take a break to discuss the new units in Generation 2, then cover Generation 2. If you made it this far into the video and enjoy the content, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'd very much appreciate it. Together, we can survive the Battle of Belhalla instead of being turned into stone or washing up on a faraway isle. I'm actively doing this challenge in real time on my live channels, so please check out the video description for social links to follow along. The prologue starts off with Sigurd, Noishe, Alec, and Arden outside of Chalfie, the OG4. Arden ain't letting no Augustrian thug take over base. This is a fairly simple chapter. The first goal is to defeat DiMaggio and capture Ljungby relatively quickly, but being ready for the units that come from Evans after the bridge goes down is important. Experience routing isn't particularly convoluted here. Getting an experience spread across all your units is a good way to make sure their stats end up alright. So the gang heads west. Sigurd and Noishe take the direct line west, and Alec and Arden go southwest towards Ljungby. On turn 2, Azel and Lex join the team, and they'll hang to the north for a while defeating the bandits, then Lex heads west. Azel will make his way south to get the speed ring we've been talking about from a village. On turn 3, the Leinster gang shows up, and they'll make their way west too. Ethlin spending as many turns healing is especially important to prioritize. Quan and Finn won't be doing all that much fighting this chapter. Finn will grab the first village for 5,000 gold. DiMaggio is an easy boss and Sigurd can take him out. Once Ljungby is seized, Gerard will lower the bridge, and having units ready to block the bridge is helpful to do some damage control. This will slow down the chapter a bit, but I found that spending a few extra turns in the prologue is worth it, because spacing out levels across your party is a nice way to make sure stats are good and balanced. While the others are fighting, Sigurd gets the silver sword from Arvis. After sifting through the Evans army, Gerard similarly goes down to Sigurd. The goal turns for this chapter is about 15 turns. You can certainly do it faster, but I decided that controlling the Evans bridge and spreading experience was worth the turns. Chapter 1 starts out like many future chapters will. All units start in home base. We're going to do a lot of arena preparation here. We don't need to cover much of the actual arena fights in this video, since most of the time the goal is to do as many arena battles as possible, which yields levels and gold. But we'll go through the specific inventory setup per character that happens at the beginning of each chapter, and any particularly important level up requirements like stats. This is a fairly linear chapter on progression, where the player has to capture Genoa, Marfa, then Verdane in that order. Ira is hanging outside of Genoa and can easily murder a party member, so a specific setup to not have her go on a rampage is utilized. In this chapter, Alec buys a slim sword from the shop, and I give Ethlin's slim sword to Arden, since she's going to be on healing duty for every possible turn she can. There's nothing like making our boy Arden light on his feet, his first step becoming more like Alec. The gang sets out against Kinbaith's army. Sigurd leads the way and takes out the brigand attacking the village. Finn has a conversation with Quan that boosts his stats, giving him that Leinster killer instinct. The Cavaliers set up a wall and take out Kinbaith's army, and ideally someone other than Sigurd gets the kill. He drops a hand axe, but if someone besides Lex gets it, Lex can easily buy it from the pawnbroker later. Du and Ideen join on turn 1. Ideen is going to make a mad dash to the northeast while Du sits on the village and fights the enemies. He steals their gold while fighting, and he'll be getting this village too. Du needs to get as much money as he can because he's going to pass it to Ideen before the chapter is over for spending money in chapter 2. A specific setup is used to make sure Ira doesn't delete the team or get deleted herself by some allies. Ideen can bait the Genoan guards from the west, and I use Quan to land a javelin on the commander. Then Sigurd can swoosh on in and take out the boss while everyone else is out of range. Once Genoa is seized, Ira will still attack party members except for Sigurd, but she heads back towards Genoa, so Sigurd can just hang out after seizing, then recruit her, while the rest of the party goes west. Elliot's army eventually appears, but they don't pose any threat. Eldigan's own army will easily clear them out, and there's no threat of losing Evan's castle. Elliot is a grade A moron, and we'll be seeing more of him soon. For the Marfa army, once again a general strategy for spreading experience works fine here. If possible, Azel landing the final blow on the boss Gandalf is good, since the boss drops a skill ring, and Azel can either sell the ring or get value out of keeping it. During this time, Du needs to have a conversation with Ideen to give her the warp staff, and Ideen needs to talk to Ethlin to give her the return staff, both of which are crucial to get. Afterwards, the slow and painful trek towards the forest takes place, but thankfully not many units are needed to go up there. Ideen needs to be nearby so that Jomki can be recruited, but it's dangerous because Jomki can critically hit with his killer bow and trigger Adept and attack twice. Jomki will not attack Ideen though. Ethlin will start using return on units to get them to go back to base for some experience, and Ideen will warp Ethlin and some other units back to base too. Deirdre joins the team and joins as a paired unit with Sigurd. Sigurd giving his money to Deirdre is also important because giving units money takes an action, and although everyone will be in base at the beginning of chapter 2, Sigurd needs to set out immediately and can't waste any time. Very importantly, Lex has an event that takes place where he gets the Brave Axe from the River Goddess, which instantly makes Lex a much better unit. Otherwise, not many units actually need to head north, and most of them get returned to base. Sigurd and Jomki together can cleave through most of the northern army, and Deirdre can use her Silence Staff twice on the boss for 100 EXP per use. When silenced, the boss can't fight, so he's easy to defeat. The goal for this chapter is somewhere around 30 to 35 turns. The forest really slows down the chapter considerably, but if you can deal with getting Iris smoothly and not having Du get wrecked by a rogue 6% hit rate attack from an axe guy, it's a fairly smooth ride. Recruiting Jomki is one of the harder parts of this chapter, then you're usually home free after. Chapter 2, The Great Equalizer. I spent an ungodly amount of time in chapter 2. There are so many moving parts to this chapter, and if you can't get a grasp on how to tackle chapter 2, you won't be making it very long term for this challenge. The enemy difficulty starts to ramp up, and trying to get all your units a spread of experience is very challenging. There's a lot of event conversation, there's a bunch of recruitment criteria, it's a lot to manage. This chapter is much less linear. First, Nordian needs to be visited to recruit Lachesis, then Sigurd and the gang head towards Herrheim, then Anthony. Then comes the very fun and not totally terrible journey to Macaulay, followed by finishing the chapter at Augusti. Lewin and Sylvia appear after seizing Herrheim, but in order to beat the Anthony bandits from destroying the Bargain Ring village, you really gotta schmoove to seize Herrheim by about turn 10. Beowulf appears around the same time and requires careful positioning to defeat Vorts and get the Paragon Ring, and Aaron appears shortly afterwards. Deirdre and Ideen need to use the warp and return staves effectively in order to make sure the right units are in the right spot at the right time, like having Lewin back at base to recruit Aaron. Starting off, Jamke and Midir swap bows as discussed before. Holin is in the arena as the final battle, so using either Sigurd or Ira to get him is sufficient. The arena is too difficult for some units to consistently clear, but doing what they can is fine. As mentioned earlier, Deirdre and Ethlin have spending money from their paired partners, and Ideen received money from Du. Swapping around staves here is very important for experience, so Ethlin will take the men's staff, Deirdre will take the warp staff, and Ideen will take the return and heal staves. Deirdre will stay in base and spend every turn she can for the entire chapter using warp for 60 EXP per use, and Ideen will start the chapter using return for 35 EXP per use just outside of base. Ethlin will follow the team and use mend. This setup lets each of these units have something to do every turn so that they get EXP consistently. Also, as mentioned before, Ethlin gets the light brand from Deirdre, which is fantastic for dealing magic damage. It's important for the entire gang to head out immediately, because not only does this entire chapter take a billion turns that we want to minimize, we have to beat the Anthony bandit before the Bargain Ring explodes. Aligning carefully near Nordion first, the Cavaliers are primarily going to lead the charge here. Sigurd recruits Lachesis, and Quan needs to defeat Elliot to get his very good weapon, the Silver Spear. Both Quan and Finn are going to be doing as much fighting as possible, since they need to over-index on experience in this chapter and the next, since they leave after chapter 3. Sigurd, Quan, and Ethlin head far north, and the rest of the units head northwest to deal with Philip's army. Philip, as a general, sports the unfortunately common Pavice skill, which is just the dirt worst. Sometimes he'll just block your attack, and that's just how it is, chump. He also does huge damage and has some authority stars, so overwhelming him is the key to success. Sigurd, Quan, and Ethlin need to aggressively take out Bordeaux and seize Herrheim as soon as possible. Then, Quan can hang north and deal with the Duke Knight. This is a good call out that sometimes the enemy AI patterns for movement are very, strange in this game. On the turn after seizing Herrheim, these three units will flee north. Then they turn around and come back down on the next turn, except for if one of your units is directly next to them, then they'll attack. There's a lot of this in the game. The foot units trail behind, but having some of them in time for Vorts' army is important. It's around this time that Quan can have a conversation with Finn to give him the Brave Lance, which is exactly what Finn needs to take off and start getting reliable experience. Vorts' army starts to descend, and although the majority of his army are chumps with weak iron swords, Vorts himself is actually extremely scary, and Quan with the Silver Lance plus Finn with the Brave Lance can handle him. Vorts drops the Paragon Ring, which will be the focus of attention soon, but you can play flexibly based on who gets it. It's nice if a unit with low gold gets it at first for money efficiency implications. Beowulf needs to be recruited for 10,000 gold. That just goes towards his character, so it's not really a waste, and he will immediately want to book it towards the bottom village guarding an armor slayer. The Anthony guards are super beefy and actually quite hard to defeat. These armor units have huge defense, and hopefully Azel and Lewin can help a little, but it depends on how fast you go. After defeating Macbeth and seizing Anthony, here begins the massive walk towards Mackley on the other side of the planet. Some enemy units start to make their way over, but your Cavaliers can deal with them as they trickle in, again prioritizing Quan and Finn for experience. We haven't talked about Lachesis, who has been standing around Nordion for the most part. She comes with 3 paladins that we don't want stealing experience, and if all 3 of them survive the chapter, Lachesis will get the helpful Night Ring at the end, so we go for that. So for a little while, she stands around and heals some units, and keeps her paladins out of range of the enemy. Once Anthony is seized, having Lachesis walk north to have a conversation with Beowulf is great, since it gives them love points and increases Lachesis' stats. We can see how quickly Deirdre is leveling based on spamming the warp staff every turn, and with Sylvia at base she can dance, which has the great effect of restoring everyone's turn at home base, so Deirdre can warp until she's out of money to repair it. Erin starts to make her way south, and as long as Lewin is guarding base, recruiting her should not be a problem for him. Meanwhile, Arden is off on his own personal journey. After hearing about Lex's success with the river goddess, he goes to the beach and finds himself a pursuit ring, which makes him more like Alec than he could ever have dreamed of. The pursuit ring plus his slim sword actually makes Arden able to double some enemies. He's on his way to becoming king of Jugdral. He's been growing up so fast. Approaching Mackley is somewhat scary, since there are ballista and the boss Clement can use the sleep staff. If you recall earlier when I was talking about getting defense level ups on Quan, Sigurd, and Lex, well, this is why. Being able to reliably deal with the rest of Chapter 2 from here massively can speed up the turn count. Without it, you get chipped for so much damage by ballista. There are some mages in the Mackley army that can do monstrous damage, so you gotta play smart. Once Sigurd is in range, he can easily defeat the boss and seize on the same turn. Elsewhere, Beowulf and Lachesis will hang out next to each other while Beowulf attempts the arena, and Lachesis can heal him. They also get love points too, a beautiful story. Now we're in the home stretch. Zane's army comes down somewhat slowly, but he himself is very scary with his Horseslayer, which is a guaranteed critical hit on mounted units. The Horseslayer is generally not that good in this game, but in this situation when you're trying to go fast with your mounted units, it's very scary and you have to play around it. Most mounted units on your team can tank it, but you have to be careful because there are so many other Canto units that can leave an opening for Zane. With Zane's army down, the final leg of the chapter isn't too bad. Chagall isn't really that difficult, but he does have some big defenses. If Quan and Finn are doing well in their stats, they can both cleave through his defenses and take him down. We get the Night Ring for our efforts for preserving Lachesis' paladin guards. This chapter is a mountain to climb, and the goal is between 40 to 50 turns. It's one of the most convoluted chapters in the game, and there are tons of strategies to consider. Trying to plan for this chapter was one of the most intense routing sessions I've had to do for the whole challenge. Chapter 3 is a less complex chapter on strategy compared to the previous chapter, but it still comes with its challenges. This chapter is the turning point of Generation 1, where by the end of the chapter, it's reasonable to start getting some promoted units, but we're gonna have to work for it. The first goal is to seize Madino, guarded by Jacobon, while fending off the spread out enemies from Augusti. Then, Eldigan comes in hot from Silvale and is the biggest challenge of the chapter. We have to use Lachesis in a very particular setup to navigate the situation safely. Sigurd and some mounted units will head towards Silvale, defeat Chagall and seize it, while the rest of the army heads north to deal with the Orgahil bandits. Papillion arrives when Eldigan is removed from combat, we'll say, and using Aaron to bait him east is crucial. Brigid, Claude, and Tiltu will appear when Silvale is seized, and have particular interactions that require juicing some turns. Notably, the Orgahil bandits have 5,000 gold each, so using Dew and someone with a thief sword is imperative for money planning. Then Sigurd will make his way up north to seize Orgahil. Starting out the chapter with the arena segment, the first and immediate course of action is for Lex to have a conversation with Ira to give her the incredible weapon, the Brave Sword. Ordinarily, when a unit finishes talking with another, their turn is over. However, if you place a unit at home base's gates and have them talk on that tile, when they finish their turn, they will be forced to either enter or move because the game does not allow units to idle on that tile. This basically saves an action for Lex in this case. The Brave Sword is so good that it warrants burning a turn immediately, just so that Ira can get back into base and start passing it around to others so that they can use it for the arena. A unit like Aaron can use the Brave Sword to huge success, which may be counterintuitive as she's a Pegasus Knight that usually uses lances. Deirdre will be leaving as soon as Madino is seized, so having her use the Warp Staff to get to level 30 is a goal. Then Ideen will need to take the Warp Staff and begin using it immediately. Ethlin will continue to use the Men's Staff to heal the party, and Lachesis will take the Return Staff and start to get experience. If she can possibly afford the Physics Staff that Chagall dropped in the previous chapter, she gets big value out of using it for experience too. The Paragon Ring will start to be more affordable for some units to pass around, but it's still a little out of reach for other units given its steep 40,000 gold cost. Beowulf's new bargain ring means that he can buy and sell it for 20,000 gold, which lets him freely get it whenever he wants. Dew should have around 30,000 gold from the previous chapter and can help a unit behind on gold. I didn't discuss it before, but there's a mechanic in this game where all allied units will get an amount of gold that scales with the number of seized and protected allied castle from the previous chapter. Any early promotions can be hugely beneficial at the start of this chapter, especially for Ethlin. The early strategy is to have the majority of the team head north towards Madino. Lex and Quan will head west, and Quan will deal with the Duke Knight's party for some experience. Lewin can stay back and defend the base, but really anyone that can fend off the Armor Knights will do. There are groups of enemies on the way to Madino, but as long as the archers don't focus on one ally, they all go down easily. Ballistas are an annoyance, but thankfully being in range of one of the guards will cause all of them to move and aggressively approach you, so you can plan around it. I can't stress enough how much easier it is to manage fighting an army that does not have mounted units with Canto compared to these guys. Heading north past the castle and taking out the ballista helped the rest of the team zone in. Jacobon is a hero class enemy and he needs to be fought safely with swords or lances, where a well-equipped Finn can do the job. Or, you know, Sigurd, as always. Jacobon drops a bolt sword that will be giving either to Du or to Ethlin based on the money circumstances, but they can buy it later from the pawnbroker. Now things get challenging. Eldigan's army moves out of Sylvale, and not only is his army kinda beefy and powerful, he himself is ridiculously strong with his Mistletoe weapon. The goal here is to have Lachesis talk to Eldigan so that he leaves the map entirely, but given there are so many Canto units, it's very risky to get Eldigan to be in a favorable spot. I came up with a self-certified genius strategy where I use Eren to bait his army away for a turn, then when his army realigns itself, he ends up being closer to Sigurd's army rather than far away like usual. Most of the mounted units plus Lachesis head south, then east to deal with the situation. After Lachesis talks to Eldigan, the Night Ring gets used to let her get away, then a staff user can use Return to get Lachesis out of there while the rest of Sigurd's army deals with theirs. After a few turns battling, the mounted units head towards Chagall. Once again, armored units are very tanky and hard to defeat quickly. Chagall is defeated somewhat easily. If it's possible, having Lex land the final blow to get his Silver Blade would be nice, but it's difficult because Lex is at weapon disadvantage. Lex can't use the Silver Blade, but he would be able to pass it down to Ulster, so it's worth a shot. Meanwhile, Papillion's army heads north of Madino to deal with the rest of Sigurd's northern army. Midir, Jonki, and Holland with his new wing clipper that he got from a village nearby, and Azel and Lewin can destroy his army. Despite being Draco Knights, they really aren't that scary, and the boss isn't particularly dangerous either. It's just their Canto ability that you have to worry about. After Sylvale is seized, the Orgahil bandits lower the bridge and start to flood in. Part of the reason for having Papillion's army go to the north here was to position for this next part. It's finally Du's time to shine and get some experience. He'll be using the bolt sword that Jacobon dropped to get some long distance attacks in, and he'll get 5,000 gold per hit. Someone with the thief sword can also hit some of the enemies for gold. Arden also is reliable for this section since these enemies don't have Canto. Pizarre is a little scary with his silver axe, but life is kind to sword users in this game. He drops the leg ring, which gives +3 to movement and eventually needs to make its way to Sigurd, so if he happens to get up there by then, he should defeat Pizarre, but otherwise he'll have to buy it from the pawnbroker. It helps him seize castles quicker, but it's mostly to pass it down to Seliph. Brigid, Claude, and Tiltiu appear during this time. Brigid will first move west to avoid the onslaught, and Claude and Tiltiu move northeast to meet up with her and the rest of the team. Tiltiu can only tank one hit before dying, but she has the really cool Wrath ability and can easily one-shot these enemies. Claude can also utilize the Fortify staff, even if it feels like a waste. It's really not because it grants good experience per use, and he should use it often. Eren can fly over and assist a little, but as long as Brigid doesn't get hit too much, everyone should be alright. There is a wind sword that Du can get from the tower, but I opt to skip it, since it would take Du a while to get it, and no one really needs it, and he already has a distance weapon by now. Ideen and Brigid must have a conversation to give Brigid the legendary bow You Fell to pass down to Faval, and there's no real need to have Ethlin give Quan the Guy Bolg, since they leave and Altena gets it either way. Quan, Ethlin, and Finn all will be leaving at the end of this chapter, so it's important to get them to a pawnbroker. If Ethlyn has promoted, she can buy the silver sword from the shop and pass it down to Leaf, which is a major help to him. Otherwise, she should pass down whatever weapon she can, including either the light brand or the bolt sword. Quan doesn't really need to pass down much because Altena comes with the Guy Bolg. Finn is passing down weapons to himself, so he can just keep some weapons on hand. If he promotes, he can get a silver lance, but otherwise the steel lance and the javelin will be fine. Rounding out the chapter, Duval guards Orgahil, but he's not very threatening at all. Sending a few sword users up there can easily deal with the situation. He drops the power ring, and it's best if Sigurd gets this too. Before the chapter ends, Tilchu needs to be returned back to base so that she can do the arena. If possible, having Du dump all of his money onto Tilchu so that she can buy the Paragon ring from someone and do the arena is massively beneficial for raising her levels. This way she can start the next chapter with it too. Sigurd can finally seize the castle and we move on. Chapter 4 is another big map, and the enemies start to get quite dangerous, but as long as your team is approaching being fully promoted, they'll be prepared. There are many mage units in this chapter, so moving forward with units that have resistance like Aaron and Claude is important. And goodbye, Leinster gang, I'm sure things will work out for you, especially in the desert, for sure. Sigurd and the party head northeast, dealing with Kavuli's mage units first. Dithorba's Pegasus Knights come from the northeast, and the player deals with both around the same time. Myos, outside of Thove, pulls a real D-bag move and raises the bridge, but our boy Du can lower it. After Thove is seized, there are a few forced turns of waiting while the tragedy of Manya occurs, and the party can either head southeast by foot or get warped back to base and head east. A bunch of units, primarily archers, should stay north and defend Thove. Eventually, the way opens towards Celeste, and villagers show up that give 100 EXP per rescue. Pamela's Pegasus Knights head north, and the party's northern unit has to deal with them. After seizing Celeste, Lamia's infantry unit appears, and the path towards Zaxxon opens up to end the chapter. There's a lot of walking in this map, and it's hard to minimize turns, but it's fairly straightforward if you have a plan for both of the Pegasus Knight legions. At home base, this is the chapter where it's very reasonable that most units can buy and sell the Paragon ring, and in many cases it's the edge each unit needs to get them to become a promoted unit. The Brave Sword and the Brave Lance help a lot of units get there. Lachesis is likely not promoted by now, but Aidin is also likely near level 30, so Lachesis can be the primary healer while Aidin fights some battles, and Claude can fairly easily get to level 30 with his Fortify staff. Some weapons change hands here, and notably Aidin and Claude get some weapons with their promoted classes. I haven't covered it much, but it's also around this time where units that are to be paired need to be next to each other as often as possible. And again, those are Lex and Ira, Midir and Aidin, Beowulf and Lachesis, Aaron and Lewin, Bridget and Alec, Tilchu and Azel, and Arden and his Slim Sword, while Sylvia braves the frosted northern wastes alone. Tilchu and Azel will not be walking northeast because of their low movement, but they have a conversation that helps their love points. Bridget and Alec are the hardest to be paired, so they really need to stick together. Most of the party heads northeast. Kavuli is surrounded by mage units who all have wind tomes, which is strong against thunder but weak to fire. Using Sylvia to make sure Claude is in the front lines is helpful because of his extremely high resistance stat. Most of Sigurd's party has low resistance, but these enemy mage units have poor mobility because of the forests and their 5 movement, so poking at them for a few turns is sufficient. Kavuli himself has a sleep staff which is annoying, but he tends to prioritize using his physics staff to heal his cohorts. Defeating him himself is fairly easy. Dithorba's unit starts to make their way down around the same time. Dithorba herself is pretty tough, and the Miracle Ring makes it difficult to secure her defeat. If Dithorba's unit gets mostly wiped out and she's still alive, she will go back to Thove and get a full new army of Pegasus Knights. Because of the forest terrain and their Canto ability plus the ability for them to fly, it can definitely be a difficult encounter. Defeating Dithorba is an option because of her 3 authority stars, which makes it easier to deal with the rest of the army. But intentionally letting Dithorba retreat and get more units is an option if the player feels that they want more experience for their party and are willing to spend a few more turns fighting. While reaching the bridge area, Mayon raises the bridge. The 3 mages here all have long distance blizzard that has a range up to 10 spaces. Because you really can't predict if the enemy is going to focus on one unit or not, either Claude or Aaron need to deal with these enemies, and it slows down progress for a bit. Dew needs to be nearby to lower the bridge, and he's even kinda smug about it. Sylvia has a unique event where visiting this particular village gives her the defense sword, which gives +7 defense on equip, which is super good. Someone passing this down to Generation 2 can be massively beneficial. Once Ideen and Midir are paired, it's imperative to have Ideen talk to Midir to give him the incredibly good Brave Bow, which will free up his killer bow back to either Jamke or Brigid. The Brave Bow is particularly great for Lester in Generation 2. As the sole flyer of the party, Aaron has some niche roles in this chapter, including helping taking out the brigands and the other mages with Blizzard in the mountains. The guards outside of Thove are pretty dangerous because of the mix of tanky armor knights and mages with Elwind, which makes it hard for your party to choose a unit or two to deal with them solely because most units don't have both defense and resistance. Aaron can possibly help bait down the guards. Paying attention to the order that units move in is very important. Miles himself is not overly hard to take out, except that Pavice is still extremely annoying. After seizing Thove, the player has about 5 turns of downtime. We sadly witness the tragic events of Manya's army getting wrecked by Andre's battalion. During this time, slower units need to be warped or returned back to home base, and a legion of mostly archer units will stay in the northeast. In the south, it's very important to be ready to go as soon as possible with everyone else, because there are 6 villagers that give 100 EXP for rescuing, and we want to give those levels to either Arden or Dew if possible. If either of them can promote soon, they should take the levels. If a unit is mounted, only promoted mounted units will be able to make it past the mountains, otherwise they get stuck. Sigurd and Aaron can lead the way with their better movement and defeat the axe fighters in time to save most of the villagers, while the rest of the army slowly makes their way over the mountains. Unlike many guard units outside of a castle, the Celestian guards will all move when provoked, so having some units bait them away from the castle while Sigurd swooses on in is a quick way to capture. However, these units are aligned with Zaxxon, meaning that capturing Celeste will not automatically defeat them. After Celeste is captured, Lewin will need to be both nearby to Celeste and to Aaron. Visiting Celeste will give him the Forseti Tome, an easy top 5 weapon in the game, and arguably the best depending on who you ask. It gives +20 speed and +10 skill, on top of having 30 might, and it makes Lewin into a self-sustaining menace. His conversation with Aaron makes them immediately paired, which is a huge deal since it means unlike other units, they do not need to be standing next to each other as turns end for the whole game up until this point. Pamela's Pegasus Knights will head north towards Thove until Celeste is captured, then they will turn around and hunt the Celeste area. So the player can decide if the Northern Legion of theirs should fight, which may require burning a turn or two, or if they should seize Celeste immediately. It takes a few turns for the whole party in the south to be ready for Lamia's units, so it doesn't matter all that much if you stall a few turns to deal with Pamela. Just like with Dithorba, defeating Pamela means she won't boost her allies with her authority stars and she won't retreat for reinforcements. Claude will have the warp staff and should warp a few units down after Celeste is seized, notably Sylvia to help with dancing. Lamia's units come next, and any available party units should head east to deal with her. Lamia herself is pretty scary with Pursuit and Adept, and her units have killer bows, brave swords, and sleep swords, all of which require careful maneuvering. Using Kanto units to safely keep space and deal with them is crucial. As always, Lachesis' Charm ability plus Sigurd's Authority Stars gives +20 hit and +20 avoid when combined together. They all have low resistance, so magic is a good idea, and Lewin's new Forseti Tome is perfect for the job. Alec using the Brave Lance is a great way to deal the final blow on Lamia. Dakar guards Zaxxon, and he's only really a threat because of his annoying Blizzard Tome. The guards all have Pavice. I don't know about you, but I sure love this skill. Approaching slowly and using the physics staff to heal up is the strategy. Lewin is great to round out this chapter. An important mechanic is that enemies will straight up not attack when they have a 0% hit rate, and they'll effectively ignore your unhittable unit and go on to move towards and target other allies. This will become more important later with Forseti. Sigurd seizes Zaxxon and we move on. And Chapter 5, the end of Generation 1. By now most units should have either promoted going into the chapter or promoted after the arena segment. Sylvia and Dew will likely be behind on levels, but that comes with the territory. Other units will play flexibly in this chapter, in particular to max out their experience as much as possible while Sigurd tries to quickly clear the map. Chapter 5 is another large map, but with most units' great movement, it's only the desert sections that slow us down. The first goal is to talk with Byron, which requires aggressively targeting down the Legion between Saxon and Lubeck. Andre and Slater come in from the east, but largely aren't too challenging. The entire party heads east to deal with Longbolt, who has massive defenses, but the Forseti tome is great for dealing with him. The dreadful desert sequence takes place where we see the Leinster gang's tragic demise. Aaron is placed very specifically to aggressively take out Vaha, who's guarding Finora, while Sigurd and Lewin head south. Magorn's Thracia unit heads north to engage with the party, where most of the party stays back at Lubeck to defend. Dealing with Vaha and Magorn around the same time sets the final part of the chapter into motion. Depending on strategies and positioning, Reptor's unit can be either fought entirely, or Lewin can defeat Reptor very quickly, which immediately defeats all of his unit. Then Sigurd seizes Velthomer and it's happily ever after. Starting out, most units should have enough money to buy and sell the Paragon Ring. Check out Arden swagging out in the arena, getting levels and single stats on level ups, and promoting to the beefy general class, just so he can sit around base afterwards. Thanks for your contribution, buddy. The party will have some chances to shift things around at future castles in this chapter, but this is the best time to set everyone up in Generation 2, which means considering everyone who will be passing down weapons and items. Remember that items that cannot be equipped by the child unit will not be inherited. For example, Lex's Brave Axe cannot be passed down to Ulster, who is a sword user. Sigurd needs the leg ring and the Paragon ring at the bare minimum, and any other rings he can afford to buy like the power or shield rings are hugely helpful, and he will be giving the Brave Sword too. Midir passes down the Brave Bow and the Killer Bow to Lester, and Ideen passes down the Mend and Warp Stabs to Lana. Ira passes down all her swords to Larcey, most likely including the Silver Sword and the Armor Slayer, and Lex likely passes down nothing to Ulster. Lachesis hands down her Miracle Sword and a Return Staff to Nana, and ideally a Return Ring as well, while Beowulf passes down his Bargain Ring and any swords he has to Dermot, including the Shield Sword and possibly the Silver Blade. Lewin passes down Forseti to Ced, and Aaron passes down the Brave Lance and any other lances she has, on top of the Thief Sword and Slim Sword. Bridget passes down the Ufel and Silver Bow to Favel, and Alec very importantly needs to pass down the Return Ring and any C-rank swords to Patty. Finally, Tilchu can't pass down the Thoron Tome to Tinny, since Tinny's Thunder Magic rank isn't high enough, so the El Thunder will have to do, and Azel passes down any tomes he has to Arthur. It's important to play flexibly in general here based on money, but some of these are non-negotiable to pass down. Heading northeast to deal with the army, the party can overwhelm them by turn 2 by playing aggressive and using the best weapons they've got. Speaking with Byron yields Sigurd a Broken Turfing, which is a nice to have but not necessary to beat the chapter, and it can't be passed down. Afterwards, Byron fades into oblivion, and Slater's army comes first. Zack's units are really not that threatening to the party's sword users, and Slater himself has 2 authority stars and isn't a threat either. The next army is Andre's, who is Bridget and Ideen's brother, a real piece of crap. His army all have brave bows, which is definitely scary, but they don't have pursuit and their stats aren't very good. Andre has 4 authority stars and a shield ring, so he definitely needs some attention to take out well, but a high defense unit should still be fine to face him. A well-built Lewin can easily clear most of this chapter by himself, but the aforementioned issue of enemies ignoring him because he's too fast exists. Meanwhile, back at base, Arden is defending Zaxxon for his life. Don't forget that we can't let any allied castle get captured ever, so he actually needs to perform his duty. If an infantry unit is behind on experience, they can help here too. Nearby Lubeck lie some ballista units, where they hit quite hard, but they're fairly inaccurate. With the road terrain on this map, mounted units can swoosh on in and take them out, as the Lubeck General Guards don't move until the boss is defeated. The boss is Longbolt, one of Sigurd's archenemies. He has the Hellswath, an incredibly good weapon that boosts his defenses. He only has Padvice, as if that's a good thing, so fast units can chip at him, but he's still very hard to defeat quickly because of his monstrous defenses. He eventually does go down, most likely to Forseti. We witness the tragic events of our friends Quan and Ethlin getting ambushed in the desert. From here, only Sigurd, Aaron, and Lewin are going to head towards Finora, and everyone else will stay behind. Aaron will get positioned in such a way that she can aggressively approach Finora before the other two get there, and there's a safe tile where Vaha can't attack because she either has 1 range or 3 range, which is perfect for keeping Aaron safe. There are cleric units with sleep staves here, but Aaron's resistance is almost definitely high enough to not be a problem. Around this time, Magorn's unit finishes off the Leinster unit, and they can start to head towards the team. The goal is to delay seizing Finora just long enough for Magorn's unit to head north instead of towards Finora. Unit groups like these typically look for a nearby castle to attempt to seize, and it's very slow and bad if these units surround but don't attack Lewin, since we need him to be as fast as possible throughout this chapter on movement. Once Magorn's unit heads north, Sigurd can seize. Magorn's unit is a little dangerous since they all have horse slayers and Magorn himself has a brave lance, but all the archers and mages up there can pretty easily defeat them with some good positioning. There are some Velthomer units that have long distance meteor attacks, so it's imperative to be aware of who can get hit at the end of a player turn. With Finora down, any last remaining changes to party setup should take place before moving on to Generation 2. It's imperative to repair weapons as much as possible going into Chapter 6. There are villages that Dew can collect money from, and if someone near the end of this chapter really needs money for a last minute setup change into Generation 2, Lachesis can use the return staff and Dew can give them gold. And both Dew and Sylvia can actually fight some of the brigands at about 20 to 30 EXP per hit since they're level 30. And it's time to confirm that whichever units need to be paired together are by now. The last part of the chapter is dealing with Reptor's army. Reptor himself is basically invincible to the rest of the team. Thorhammer takes his skill and speed so high, on top of his excellent defenses and Pavice ability. The rest of his army is pretty scary too, with a bunch of promoted units with silver weapons. There's 2 courses of action here. Lewin can be placed specifically to lure Reptor to fight Lewin, and Lewin can definitely take him out quickly, which immediately deletes the rest of his army. Or you can play the slow way and take out the whole army, if the player thinks the experience is worth it. This is the last time the player can push for experience before Generation 2, so keeping track of how many level ups the player has out of the 1000 level ups for the A rank is important. It should be somewhere around 500 for Generation 1. Naturally, not dealing with Reptor's army is faster and less of a headache, so if possible, that's the preference. Finally, Sigurd makes his way up to Velthomer and seizes. This chapter is not really that difficult besides making sure Reptor is defeated swiftly by Forseti. It's just about making sure that things are lined up for Generation 2 and not missing anything major in the preparation, which can be very costly to recover from. Sigurd proceeds to have a nice conversation with Aida, then is warmly welcomed by Arvis, and Jugdril is saved. The end. Oh weird, what's happening here? Looks like some meteor showers? Guess I'll die. Alright, we're gonna move quickly for the sake of time. Change gears because the old guard is dead and the new squad is here. Let's meet the characters of Generation 2. We don't need to cover each unit category in detail like we did before, but we can talk about some units. Starting with Seliph, powering up Seliph quickly is our main way to navigate Generation 2 in general. He's got the leg ring, he starts with the Paragon ring, and with the Brave Sword he can start to cleave his way through the game, seizing castles and pushing the game forward. Larce and Ulster are available early, and they are the cornerstone of dealing with many enemy units early in Generation 2. Julia and Nana are early healers, and similar to Deirdre and Ideen, using the staves like the Warp Staff and the Men's Staff and consistently healing is important for experience. Fee is available early in Generation 2 and is super important for disrupting enemy factions by rerouting them. Leaf and Nana need careful treatment to get going on their levels in Chapter 7, but once they do get going, they become incredible units. Patty the Thief and Layla the Dancer have the same experience problems that Dew and Sylvia had respectively, and Altana is a second flyer and is very welcome to the team, although she joins late. All in, with the right weapons from Generation 1, most units start out powerful from the gate and can sustain themselves easily in the early arena segments and get levels. Starting off Generation 2 is the Campaign and Isaac. Seliph's new party heads east, where Seliph moves much faster than the rest of the team because of his leg ring. Ganeshire is guarded by Harold, but Seliph can overwhelm him by himself while the rest of the squad catches up. Afterwards, Fee and Arthur appear as allies, and Johan and Johalvir appear as enemies. Johann is recruited safely with Larse, and the rest of the enemies are taken out. Schmidt's unit is somewhat dangerous because of their high attack power, but they're all axe users. Fee can help intercept and distract them, while Seliph and Dermot with his shield sword can safely fend them off. If Sofara was seized, it would yield 1000 gold to all allies as a prize going into the next chapter, but for the interest of saving turns we skip it and seize Isaac instead. Danan, who's guarding Ravo, similarly goes down to the sword users. We start off with 4 units, and everyone will aggressively head towards Ganeshire. Seliph's leg ring boosts his movement by 3 as we've seen before, which really speeds things up in this chapter, and with all of his other rings including the Paragon ring, he'll be gaining levels and cleaving through enemies. Larse and Ulster will also gain levels quickly with Paragon too. Lana may fall a bit behind in this chapter, but she'll get plenty of opportunities for experience soon. Oife, Dermot, and Lester join shortly after and can catch up with their good movement. Everyone generally heads east as quickly as possible. Lester can make his way northeast to the village of Ganeshire for some money he could use soon. If Seliph takes too much damage, he can pivot south and hit the church up to get a full health restore. Although it's possible to play super aggressively and save some turns in early parts of this chapter, my general strategy is to wait for the whole squad to catch up while Seliph is dealing with seizing Ganeshire, and then get ready for Johann's squad. Julia joins, and Lana needs to talk to her to give her the men's staff. Seliph can easily take out Harold, the boss of Ganeshire, but should wait to seize until everyone's ready for Johann. Afterwards, Seliph's brave sword will likely be nearly broken, so he can visit the blacksmith and attempt to repair it as much as possible. Arthur and Fee will join afterwards, and Fee can aggressively head east. Johalvir and Johann's armies will head towards the party, and the goal is to recruit one of them, and we choose Johann for his superior mounted movement and Canto ability. If the party is positioned right such that most units are far away from Johalvir, Fee can bait Johalvir's army to the west, which frees up some turns for the eastern party to head south safely. Johann's units turn green and will infight with Johalvir's, but really Johalvir's will wreck them quickly. Larse and Ulster will stay back and handle the leftover axe fighters. Johalvir himself is somewhat scary, but as long as they don't get hit too much, they'll be alright. Arthur can steer clear of them, but he can attempt to defeat the axe fighter guarding Sofara. If Arthur gets hit, he'll be able to activate Wrath and guarantee critical hits. He needs to be careful, but otherwise he can get some of the villages too. And Julia will be picking up the speed ring from the village, mostly that she can sell it for money, and she's gonna desperately need it in chapter 7 to get going on some levels. It'd be nice for her to get some other villages, but it takes way too many turns to do so. Schmidt's army comes in from Ravo and will first capture Isaac from the green units, then eventually head towards the army. They all have hand axes, which isn't overly scary, but there are a lot of them. The scary part is Schmidt himself. Large attack power plus Brave Axe means that even sword users can get 2 hit by him and immediately killed. Schmidt holds a Brave Axe, and it's very nice if Johann can get this immediately. So planning damage to enable Johann getting this weapon while staying safe is the strategy. Unfortunately, dealing with this part safely means that it will slow things down quite a bit. But Dermot can block the way with his shield sword, and others can poke in hits until Schmidt is nearby. Sometimes enemy Canto is also hard to plan around too. But eventually Johann can secure the kill and get the Brave Axe. The way it works in this game is that Brave Axe is actually the same Brave Axe that Johann's grandfather Lex was holding, so it will come with the kill stars. Seliph will seize Isaac, which then allows Julia to have a conversation with him to get the very crucial Nosfera 2 tome. From here, most units won't be necessary to move west to Ravo. Arthur and Fee can hang out next to each other to attempt to get some pairing points, but as talked about before, pairings aren't as crucial in this generation compared to Generation 1. A unit like Oife can head to the northwest and get a village for some gold. Danan really isn't all that much of a threat himself, and then Oife's Armor Slayer plus Dermot, Lester, and Seliph can all wear down Danan. This chapter is a little unfortunate feeling on turn count, because although Seliph has the leg ring and it'd be nice to move and seize much more quickly, there are multiple reasons why the player has to slow down. When approaching Johann's army, Seliph should wait for the rest of the team. When dealing with Schmidt's army, the party needs to be together too. Julia needs to be nearby Seliph when seizing Isaac to get the Nosfera 2 tome, so it ends up taking more turns for these things, but they're all important. As long as the turn count is somewhere around 30, it's not a big deal and we move on. Alright, so remember how Chapter 2 was a massive chapter? We're so back. Chapter 7 is a huge chapter and it takes many turns to clear, even when going fast. The player gets many new units in this chapter, and micromanaging the whole chapter is an all-encompassing endeavor. From Revaux, Seliph needs to seize Yeed, which requires him booking it west across the desert with Julia and Fee. The rest of the party will head southwest. Shannon and Patty are near Yeed. Shannon will stick around and help defeat enemies, while Patty uses the return ring to go back to base immediately. Meanwhile, Leif, Nana, and Finn are stuck in the Leinster area and need to carefully fight for their lives. They'll stay in this area the whole chapter until the very end. Seliph will eventually seize Yeed, opening the way towards Melkin, guarded by Lisa and Ishtor. Then, Darna is guarded by Jabaro and Bramsil, then the way opens up with Ares and Lelia joining the team. Seliph has to backtrack north to seize this castle, while the rest of the party heads east to deal with the mage units from Ulster, including recruiting Tinny with Arthur. Finally, Seliph makes his way down south to deal with Bloom to clear the chapter. Seliph has so much ground to cover, so he gets big mileage out of the leg ring, and some uses of warp and return are also possibly helpful for the whole team. The arena is once again available. Seliph is going to keep the Paragon ring and needs to clear the arena for levels and money to repair his Brave Sword. If not already, his Brave Sword should be near 50 kills so that it enables the critical ability. Ulster and Larcey will get a bunch of easy levels with their Paragon abilities, and getting some defense growths on them is very helpful. The shop has quite a few things to buy. Oife can buy a Slim Lance, and Ulster can buy a Steel Blade. Most units can clear the arena fully here, and the ones that can't can give Lana and Julia something to heal. Lana needs to give her warp and physics stabs to Julia, and Julia needs to sell her skill ring to afford them. Something I didn't mention before is how Seliph has 3 authority stars, so he grants 20 hit and 20 avoid for being near units, even more than Sigurd did. Anyway, Seliph heads west immediately to move towards Yeed, which will take a while, and both Fee as a flyer and Julia with the physics staff will support. Shannon gets the legendary weapon Balmung from Patty and will fight off the enemies guarding Yeed so that Seliph can seize quicker, and Patty uses the return ring on turn 2 to safely exit the area. The rest of the party will slowly head southwest. There really is no rush because they have to wait for Seliph to seize Yeed, and guards are blocking the way further south until Yeed is seized. Dermont has a conversation with Oife that raises his stats too. Meanwhile, Leif's party in the south will slowly deal with the brigands, since Leif really can use the money and the speed ring in the eastern village too. However, although the eastern brigand is defeated, that village will remain unvisited for a while for territory control purposes, where bandits will go towards other villages instead for a while, and Leif heads west to take out the other brigands. Over many turns, Leif's party will hang in the west. The Ulster forces will seize Leinster, but because this was a green castle, the player does not get penalized on ranks for having a castle seized, and Leinster does not need to be seized by the player in this chapter at all. Leif's party will slowly deal with the Ulster forces over this whole chapter, prioritizing experience for Leif as much as possible. It's an option to either defeat the general commander or let him retreat to deal with more reinforcements. It's a toss-up because these reinforcements can be tough to deal with on the second round. I opt to lure the general and the mage out with careful positioning, using Finn with Nana's charm ability to get them to come close while the rest of their army seizes Leinster. Xutov, the leader of Yeed, will get a Fenrir Tome, a 10 range distance attack, if the player takes more than 11 turns to defeat him, so it's important to defeat him before then. Shannon can very easily defeat Xutov in battle, but the nearby dark mages should be taken out so that Shannon doesn't get killed on enemy phase, so Fee can help take them out, and Julia can use physic wherever she's needed to. After Yeed is seized, the terrain changes so that Seliph can easily head south, though it will still take a while. Ishtor's army comes out, and Liza leads the way. Liza's entire unit will head towards the party if any of their units are in range of attacking. Oife can bait them slowly north while the party gets ready for battle. There are a lot of units, and the armored units take a while to wear down. Liza herself is a somewhat dangerous unit, but she comes with the more problematic 4 authority stars for her army. While the party is dealing with them, Fee will visit the northwest village to get a shield ring, which is really good for her since she can either keep it or sell it to exchange for Dermot's barrier ring. Leif slowly deals with the rest of the armored units around Leinster and heads towards the village to get the speed ring finally. I did think about an alternative strategy where Nana uses the return staff on Leaf and Finn immediately, then Nana uses her own return ring to go to base, and they all leave Leinster to burn. It's an interesting thought, but I decided that it causes Leaf to lose out on too much experience. Even if it's somewhat slow around here, there's no real rush with this team because realistically, they aren't really helping that much. Very importantly, Patty needs to have a conversation with Seliph to give him a Brave Sword. Did you hear me? Another Brave Sword, that's right. This is incredibly good to give to another party member. On the southern front, Oife can bait some attacks and carefully using Lester's Brave Bow to deal damage on enemy phase. Lester in particular is fantastically set up for this chapter to deal big damage and take a lot of the enemies out, especially mages, because he won't have the experience that Seliph, Larcey, and Ulster have with their Paragon ability. Slowly baiting the enemy army helps deal with how dangerous they are and stays out of ballista range. Eventually enough enemy units go down and Shannon from the north can swoop in and take out Liza. On enemy phase, Shannon and Seliph can easily handle themselves, and Larcey has a conversation with Shannon that gives her +2 strength. Shortly afterwards, Ulster and Larcey need to head to the west to get ready for Darna's army. At Melgen, ballistas await, though they don't have huge attack power. The more dangerous aspect is that Ishtore has a bolting tome, and he has the adept ability, so sometimes he will double, which is incredibly scary. The goal here is to bait the ballistas to attack weaker defense units, so that 1 or 2 units can deal with Ishtore's onslaught. Even though mounted units can defeat the ballistas quickly, they are immediately endangered by Ishtore. But it's okay, this gives Lana and Julia targets to heal. Ultimately, if the player gets real unlucky, it can be over immediately. But Shannon's got huge avoid and has a decent chance of making it, and Seliph has the Nihil ability so he can ignore Ishtore's adept skill. After Ishtore is defeated and Melgen is seized, this chapter diverges a bit. Ares is chased out of Darna, and Seliph needs to make his way north in order to seize it. The only reason Darna needs to be seized is to recruit Lelia, otherwise we could skip it, and Ares needs to be the one to visit Darna to recruit her. So Ulster and Larcey will hang to the south and draw in the army, while Ares stays nearby. The much more complicated task lies in the southeast with Ulster. There are 2 armies that come out of Ulster, and which direction they go heavily depends on how the player has positioned their units. The goal is to place Finn in a way that baits one group of enemies north and the rest head west, specifically the one with Tinny. Finn will lure them all the way north to where Leaf and Nana are, and they'll all fight for a while. If Finn can bait the 3 dangerous mages to the north, who are Eriu, Fatla, and Bonba, it makes the western army much easier to deal with. The western army needs to be handled very carefully. Fee can lead them a particular way while the rest of the party gets ready. Arthur needs to be nearby, since he has to talk to Tinny to recruit her. Julia can warp her back to base so that she can do the arena, which will be a common strategy from here on out. All the new units in this chapter need to get to the arena. In the north, Jabaro's army is mostly cleaned up by Ulster and Larcey, while Seliph makes his way north. Ares needs to hang nearby, but Ulster and Larcey's defense and avoid are more reliable. Jabaro himself is somewhat dangerous with his high skill, and he will flee when his army is mostly defeated, so trying to catch him before he gets reinforcements helps. Seliph should have a fully powered up Brave Sword by now, and with every kill it gets a higher chance to get critical hits. Bramsel, who's guarding Darna, is not a threat at all, and Seliph goes on to seize Darna. Ares can finally enter Darna to recruit Lelia, this generation's dancer, and they can stand next to each other each turn from here while she uses dance every turn for some experience. Seliph has to make his way to the southeast. I consider having Julia warp him to Melgen, but I didn't really save that much time. Julia keeping units healed gives her a lot of experience. His great movement means that it won't take him that long anyways. During this time, the rest of the party slowly closes in on Ulster. The boss, Bloom, is extremely dangerous and not even Shannon can deal with him safely, so Seliph will have to do the job. Enemy reinforcements will pour out of Ulster after some time, but it can get out of control. Instead, if units surround the spawn point, 1 unit will spawn an attack, and only 1 appears per turn. This lets Lana and Julia get some healing in too. In the north, Leaf and the crew continue to bait the Mage Sisters and the General's army. When they get close to the edge of the continent, Nana will use the return staff to return them back to base, which lets Leaf and Finn do the arena. Then, Nana can use her return ring and also do the arena. Similarly, Julia can warp Shannon back to base near the end of the chapter, while Ares clears the arena while he's waiting near Darna. Getting these units to do the arena is nice for some experience, but that edge of getting them 17,500 more gold is really the difference maker for enabling the Paragon Ring set up by Chapter 9. Finally, Seliph arrives in time to deal with Bloom. Bloom has the Mjolnir just like his father Reptor and is very dangerous. Seliph will have enough health to deal with him, and getting a Brave Sword critical will make the difference of taking him down, and Seliph can finally seize. This chapter is the longest chapter in Generation 2 by far, by sheer size and things to get done. This marks a turning point in the game where most chapters from here will take far fewer turns with more efficient setups. So even though this chapter takes somewhere around 40 to 45 turns and is above average, the next few will be far below average. Chapter 8 is yet another large map, but Seliph should be promoted by now if everything's been going well for him, and he can move quickly. The other units need to balance getting experience, but it's time to start ending chapters more quickly. The party starts with Ulster, except for Leif's army stationed in Leinster. Julia will warp Seliph to Leinster immediately, and he will move in a particular way to bait Ovo's army. Seliph will be going at full speed this chapter, while the rest of the team will slowly deal with Muhammad's army in the south and head northeast. The Mage Sisters are back, and Ishtar is also on the field and highly dangerous, but Seliph can maneuver around them and take on Bloom, who's guarding Connaught. After seizing Connaught, Sed will appear at Manster, and with his Forseti tome he will be invaluable for the Draco Knights coming from the south. Villagers approach the north, and they can be rescued for 100 EXP each, like back in Chapter 4. The Draco Knights will eventually head towards the west, so the party that fought Muhammad can intercept them there. Seliph will head south at full force with Sed and aggressively defeat Mykov and seize Mies. Starting off, Seliph pops off with a promotion and instantly goes from being the best unit on the team to the best unit in the whole game. With his Brave Sword and his rings, he is nearly unstoppable. Units can buy the Brave Sword and Brave Lance as necessary for the arena, but most don't need it. Dermot buys and sells the Paragon Ring for free because of his bargain band, and although most units won't get the Paragon Ring, the ones that can definitely should. Ares has a nice time with his Mistletoe, and so does Shannon with his Balmung. It's important to plan who the Paragon Ring will stay on at the end, to save money from buying and reselling. After all home-based units are done training, Leif should buy the Paragon Ring and the Brave Sword from the pawnbroker, which is a long-distance transaction, and he's going to keep those for a while. It's time to start power leveling Julia with the Warp Staff, so she'll stay behind and do the same strat her mother did back in Chapter 2. Patty needs to give her money so that she can sustain herself. Ideally, she did so in the previous chapter before it was over. Lana and Nana will take to the field and keep people healed. In previous chapters, most of the time general strategies were taken to get through the early parts of chapters, prioritizing safety. But from here on out, the first few turns should be fairly set for how Seliph moves around, in order to both save turns and route enemies in a particular way. On turn 1, Seliph can head as east as possible, and Julia can warp Johan and some other high defense units up north. On turn 2, Seliph needs to take out Ovo immediately. Ovo has a unique sprite in this game for some reason, and although he's cool, he's also dead to the Brave Sword. Julia can send other units north to help Leif, Finn, and Nana with the rest of Ovo's units. Finn has a conversation with Leif that gives Leif +3 strength too. Lelia can dance so that Julia can warp more people up there. Finn needs to move east far enough to bait the units west, or else they will surround Seliph and block his path, and both Nana and Dermot's charm skills are great here for hit and avoid rates. For some bizarre reason, the Mage Sisters with their leg rings decide to attack Seliph at close range, which is hugely helpful. As long as they don't all land their hits on him, he'll be fine. Seliph can spend turn 3 at the church to heal if he really needs to, and on turn 3, Patty needs to be warped north so that she can eventually recruit Favel. The infantry units can handle Muhammad's army, especially Larse, Ulster, and Shannon. Besides being tanky armor units mostly, they really aren't anything difficult, and Fee can do Fee things and fly away. The remnants of Ovo's army are a little tricky, but if possible, using Dermot with his shield sword to bait them north and close them off with other units can be very nice for letting Patty walk east towards Favel. Seliph needs to clear out the bridge area, but he has to wait for Favel to clear the bridge so that Favel doesn't end up getting killed. Favel can hit Seliph without much danger though. Favel finally joins, and he has decent bases, but he's gonna have a hard time getting going on his levels. He'll head south and go help with the Draco Knights later. Ishtar shows up around this time and she's extremely scary. Seliph needs to dodge her and deal with Bloom at the same time. If Seliph does have enough attack power, it's possible he can one-round her, but it depends on her avoid. After she's defeated, Julius will appear and she warps away. There are 3 nearby mages with bolting tomes, so overwhelming them is the way. Taking a turn or two to regroup might be worth it in this section, and once the southern army deals with Muhammad, they can hang out for a while and wait in the southwest. We can take a minute to appreciate just how many levels Julia is getting at base while using the warp staff twice a turn thanks to Lelia's dancing. Patty and Nana can use their return rings to get back to base, and Nana can start using the return staff to get some levels herself. While Seliph is trying to take out Bloom, it's important to either defeat the 3 long-distance mages or have other targets for them to hit your team so Seliph can stay relatively unharmed. Eventually Bloom goes down and Seliph can seize, which opens up Mies and spawns a billion Draco Knights. Patty and Nana should be warped north, and Seliph, Patty, and Nana aggressively head south. Seliph can reach Sed in 2 turns to recruit him, and Patty can start rescuing the villagers for some experience. Alternatively, another lower experienced battle unit could get the villagers to give them the edge they need. Sed, new to the team, can hang at Manster and do the arena, then guard Manster from the Northern Draco Knight Legion. Finally, the southwestern unit has something to do, which is to deal with all the Draco Knights. Things can get a little scary, but they can get the job done. It's a good opportunity for Favel to train up in particular. The Northern Draco Knights might ignore Sed if he has the Forseti on because they can't hit him, so it's important to swap to Elwyn to give them a chance to hit him. Julia's promoted and owning in the arena, and Seliph is in the south, absolutely cleaving through the enemy army by himself. His goal is to seize Castle Mies as fast as possible, and the rest of the party will get whatever experience they can from the Draco Knights. Fee is in the east attempting to get the Thief Ring during this time too. Altena's over there, but she's just big chillin' for now. And this rogue will steal all of Fee's gold if they have a fight, so Fee should try to steer clear of her and just get the village. To be honest, this ring is not very crucial for the rank challenge, but why not get it if you can? If possible, Favel should do the arena before ending the chapter, then Seliph easily defeats Makalov and seizes and moves on. This chapter is a little scary at some parts, but if Seliph is good like he usually is and fully promoted by turn 1, this chapter can be done in around 20 turns, which is well below average. Chapter 9 is a completely unique kind of chapter. The first handful of turns need to be handled very specifically, and all of the work of getting units ready, Leaf especially, will pay off here. Our party starts at Meath. Instead of the standard romp at the start, Seliph needs to run past Cappadocia and seize Lutetia at first. Charlo joins the team, and he needs to be warped immediately back to Meath so that he can talk to Hannibal to recruit. Meanwhile, Altena's army heads north towards Meath, and Leaf needs to position himself very specifically to talk to her. Afterwards, Trevant will head north, and the party needs to deal with his Draco Knights too. After recruiting Hannibal, Musar's legion comes from the northwest, and some units need to be stationed to protect Lutetia. Seliph aggressively makes his way south to deal with Judah guarding Grucia, but he has to wait for Altena to make her way to him so that she joins the team. At Thracia, Aryan sends out a bunch of Draco Knight legions towards the allied castles. Strong units will need to guard these castles, and Seliph very swiftly moves around Aryan's army to quickly seize Thracia to wrap up the chapter. This marks the turning point where most units can buy and sell the Paragon Ring for the arena. Julia can do the arena now, and she wrecks the opposition. Remember that light magic is actually very good. Leaf still has the Paragon Ring from the previous chapter, and it's really important for him to promote after doing the arena. Many other units can start promoting now, and the party is starting to become stacked. So, as mentioned in the overview, there are some unique goals in this chapter. Hannibal's army should be largely ignored while Seliph moves, but in order not to make this chapter come to a crawl, the strategy should be fairly set per playthrough to keep things moving. Let's break down the beginning of this chapter turn by turn because this is all very particular. On turn 1, Seliph will leave base, and Lelia will dance for him to go as far as possible. Seliph will fend off Hannibal's army specifically with a weaker weapon so that Hannibal doesn't get immediately killed. The Steel Lance is good for it. The majority of the party moves out of Meath from here. On turn 2, Seliph attempts to defeat Kanats at Cappadocia and heads southwest towards Lutetia. It's important that he does not seize Cappadocia now. Hannibal would be immediately defeated if he did. On turn 3, Seliph heads just outside of Lutetia, and the northern party gets ready for Altena's army. Leif and Lelia need to be ready in the southwest, and Dermont and Nana need to be nearby with their charm skills. On turn 4, Seliph can defeat Disler and seize Lutetia, and Charlo is recruited. Leif is going to go down as far as possible, where Lelia can dance for him, and other units will clear the way so that Leif can talk to Altena. The rest of the army can deal with her unit, and she leaves. Hannibal's army will start to head northeast now, and Trevant's army heads north too. On turn 5, Lana will warp Nana to Lutetia. The top units will get ready for Trevant. Seliph will head south as far as possible from here on out. On turn 6, Nana uses Return on Charlo to send him back to base. Charlo needs to head out immediately to get on the road, and Lelia needs to dance so he heads towards Hannibal further. Trevant's army will be attacking next turn. On turn 7, Leif needs to defeat this particular High Priest enemy that happens to drop a Fortify staff. Then Charlo can talk to Hannibal, and the rest of his army fades. Ced can go south with this positioning so that he can defeat Trevant immediately, and the rest of the party fends off the Draco Knights. Seliph can very easily defeat Judah, but he should not seize because Altena needs to talk with Seliph to join the team, and if he seizes then she will be defeated as an enemy. So Seliph can clear out the ballistas before this happens. Meanwhile, Musar's knights come from the north and he brings a threatening army. Lana needs to start immediately warping strong units to Lutetia to defend. Musar is very scary, he's very fast and his tornado attack can double because he has pursuit. Let's talk about our new unit, Charlau. He has Paragon, so he just needs to use stabs every turn he can. He gets 70 experience for every use of physic that he has. He's going to be low on money, and he can't do the arena for a long time, so any extra money that Patty has can help him out. Seliph slowly deals with the ballista, and then Altena finally makes her way to him and she joins the team. She's a fantastic unit, and her Guy Bolg makes her out of control good. Seliph can seize Grushia immediately after she joins. Interestingly, Musar's entire unit fades away immediately after seizing Grushia, even though they're from Granvale. If any unit needs some money, they can head north to visit these villages, and Fee will get the barrier ring from the village here. Afterwards, Ced needs to be returned and warped to Capithogia for safety. Once Grushia is seized, Arion sends out 1 Gorillion Draco Knights. There are 4 battalions. Arion stays near Thracia, 1 heads towards Lutetia, 1 towards Capithogia, and 1 towards Meath. So at least 1 strong party unit needs to guard each castle. But these battalions aren't really that scary, except for their commanders. Seliph can move very quickly and will aggressively head towards Thracia by himself. Thracia Castle is not actually guarded by any units, so if Seliph can seize the castle, the chapter can be finished immediately. Seliph can pretty easily navigate around Arion's army with his incredible movement. If the player's party needs experience, they can stall with Seliph a few turns and let some units defeat the Draco Knights. Before the chapter is over, the player needs to consider that Julia will be leaving immediately at the start of the next chapter. When she's in evil mode in the final chapter, she will keep her items, so it might be a good idea to take items off of her. If she can buy a skill ring, she definitely should, since it'll help her in the final chapter against Julius. Once everything's wrapped up, Seliph can seize. This map is really when the sauce of all the planning comes together. Being able to have Seliph aggressively take out the whole chapter while everyone else gains experience from fighting Draco Knights feels good. With this, we move on to chapter 10, approaching the home stretch. Chapter 10, it's time to come home to Chalfie, and this frickin' guy Arvis is sitting on its throne. Most of the party should be level 20 or higher, and working on under-leveled units is one of the goals for this chapter, maybe more than ever. The party begins the chapter facing down a battalion of enemy dark mages in the forest, which Seliph sneakily runs past while the rest of the party deals with them. Seliph aggressively heads west and takes out Hilda at Kronos. Riddle's army blocks Seliph's progress, but he similarly tanks a few hits and bypasses them. Next, Seliph takes out Morrigan at Rados, and the rest of the party meets him in the middle when the way towards Miletos opens up. Patty and a few other units can stay behind and get experience, Patty in particular getting experience from rescuing the villagers. Fee helps take out the upcoming sleep staff users, and Seliph similarly moves forward aggressively to take out Zagam, while steering clear of Julius and Ishtar. Mounted units primarily help from here on the party side, and after seizing Miletos, Arvis finally makes his appearance as a boss. His army, the Rotten Ritter, blocked the bridge for a while. Seliph has to sneak by once again to make his way east to get the turfing from Paulmark, and later Patty will come up to this area and rescue more villagers. Finally, with the turfing in hand, Seliph defeats Arvis and regains the throne to Chalfie. Julia has left the party, but she'll be back soon. In the arena, Patty can use her Sleep Edge to put almost every enemy to sleep, which is clearly a good strategy. The only downside is that it will cleave through her weapon usage because of her low strength, and the Sleep Sword is expensive to repair. Tinny can finally buy the Thoron once she promotes. Leaf is going to buy the Rescue Staff from the shop, which is finally available. The Rescue Staff is, in short, broken. It lets a unit bring another unit up to 10 tiles away from the user's location, and then the other unit can still take their turn. This alone can extend Seliph's movement quite a bit, but if combined with Lelia's dancing, it makes Seliph's potential movement on one turn even greater. The movement shown here isn't what I use in this chapter, but it shows you how powerful it can be. As a quick aside, this is possible to get back in Generation 1 with Ideen being paired with Azel or Claude, but I felt it wasn't worth it overall. In my strategy hunting, I found that forcing Ideen's pairing to not be with a bow user hurt Lester so much, and that the rescue staff strategies were only really valuable in Chapter 10 and the final chapter. On turn 1, most units move out to deal with the Dark Mage Battalion, which have a variety of fun things like Sleep Staves, the Hell Spell which sets somebody's HP to 1, and Long Distance Fenrir. The goal is to defeat the Sleep Staff user on the right side and position Seliph in the south so that the other Sleep Staff user is out of Seliph's range. Then the rest of the army goes south, notably Leaf, Arthur, and Ares in the front lines. Nana can rescue Lelia back to base safely. It is a little scary on the first enemy phase, but it's pretty important to play the start of this chapter aggressively. Riddle's army heads out on turn 1, but they are far away for now. On turn 2, Seliph can head towards Hilda, who's guarding Kronos Castle. Someone was likely put to sleep, so Lana can finally use the Restore Staff she's been hanging onto this entire generation. Lana will sell her Warp Staff so that Charlo can start using it for 100 experience per turn, and she can usually promote by now so that she can contribute in combat. Charlo can heal with the Physics Staff at first and then start warping. Seliph easily destroys Hilda and seizes Kronos. After, Charlo can warp Patty to Kronos so that she can rescue the villages for 6 levels of experience for rescuing them. Mostly everyone else will head west, and a few units will stay back at base so that Charlo and Nana can use warp and return stabs as much as possible for experience. Seliph can stop at the church nearby to heal if he needs. Morrigan, who's guarding Rados, has Fenrir, a long-distance tome, but otherwise he is not a threat. Also, if it wasn't evident by now, Seliph's Brave Sword should have 99 kills on it, so it is giving a ridiculous amount of critical hit rate. Leaf should move west so that he can use the Rescue Staff on Seliph soon. This section can be a little scary for Seliph to solo, so the player can play as aggressive as they need based on the number of turns they have for the overall ranking. Back at base, Nana and Charlo are getting tons of experience, and Charlo will be able to promote soon. Nana has been fairly behind on levels, but she'll be caught up soon. The way towards Miletos opens. This is one of the more cumbersome crawls because of the forest terrain and mages. Some of them have Fenrir and Sleep, just like at the start. Altena and Fee can head north to rout some of the enemies. Fee in particular can take out the Sleep Staff users with her high resistance and her barrier ring, but she has to avoid the snipers. Seliph should move very carefully to avoid the Sleep Staff users too, while the rest of the party catches up and gets ready. After enough time, our girl Nana can finally promote. It's a miracle. Leaf can use the Rescue Staff again to get Seliph to approach Miletos with speed. On the right turn, overwhelming the enemy with a bunch of targets for Sleep lets Seliph pass by, and by the time the rest of the army catches up, it's too late and Seliph can swoosh on in and deal with the boss Zagum. Yeah, cursed fate, he says. Check this Brave Sword critical instead. Ishtar and Julius are out here and can be a threat, but if played right, Fee baited them to the right and Seliph can ignore them entirely. Arvis is back, and this guy is finally going down. Get off the Chalfie throne, you dingus. Palmark's off to the east and needs to be rescued, so Fee will go north to deal with the mages. If Fee can land a Berserk, which we haven't talked about much, it can help cause disarray for the enemies. Seliph heads out immediately to block the bridge and make headway for the rest of the team to deal with the Rotten Ritter, Arvis's army. Lana should be warped immediately to Miletos so that she can use the Restore Staff when someone gets put to sleep, and Patty should get warped up there too. Eventually, Seliph can make his way through the army and break through the east, while someone reliable like Ares or Leaf can block the bridge. Seliph needs to stay out of sleep staff range. Lelia, finally being near combat, can be helpful for restoring turns for Kanto users. If you haven't caught on by now, most infantry units are kinda useless in this chapter after the start. The enemies that go first aren't Kanto units, so they slow down the bridge, but once Seliph goes through, there's no real rush for a while. Seliph has to deal with Arvis's guards, who have Meteor too. Finally, Seliph talks to Palmark and gets his birthright, the Turfing, and hot dang is it a good weapon. It boosts his resistance to crazy high levels, and he can easily deal with Arvis's guards. Meanwhile, everyone else picks off the rest of the bridge enemies. Afterwards, making sure to stay clear of the Meteor gang, Leaf can use the rescue staff to let Patty get near the villagers near Palmark. Seliph can take some of the Meteor users out to help too. Seliph's resistance can be high enough so that the Meteor guys don't even bother trying to hit him, and getting Lelia over to the villages can help speed up a few turns too. Despite Seliph being absolutely cracked, Arvis is very difficult himself. Seliph should focus on clearing the Meteor users so that Dermot and Nana can get nearby to boost his hit and evade rates with Charm. Patty can rescue the villagers and get as much experience as she can. Arvis has Nihil, so Seliph cannot critically hit, so using the Turfing is the best way to go. How's this guy gonna activate Pavice twice in a row while I get hit? Ares instead can help deal some damage, and eventually Arvis goes down. This chapter has quite a bit of variance on the number of turns it takes, between dealing with Seliph's western journey to Rados and Riddle's army, the slow crawl to Miletos, and trying to defeat Arvis in a reasonable amount of turns. But at this point, the party is extremely powerful and it's off to the final chapter. We're here, the end of the game. This chapter can be handled a number of ways, largely depending on how many levels the player needs to secure the A rank for experience, and the turn count for tactics. I'm going to be showcasing the more aggressive strategy for this chapter. The party begins at Chalfie, and the first target is Edda, guarded by Jufiel at the castle and a large number of enemy units outside. With Leaf's rescue staff, Seliph can breeze past all the enemies and defeat Jufiel in a few turns. After, the rest of the party heads to the north to defend against Brian's powerful axe army while Seliph makes his way back west. After slipping past Brian and seizing Dozel, the majority of the team stays back at base while Leaf, Lelia, and Seliph head to the northwest, once again bypassing most of Hilda's army and defeating Dagon at Frege. Ariane comes from the southeast, but Altena can easily talk to him to force him to become a neutral unit. Seliph backs off for a few turns, while Fi has a very important role to bait Ishtar's infantry army to the north, and Ares instead deal with the dangerous Pegasus sisters. Once the way is clear, Seliph heads to the northeast, where Julia is an enemy unit until Seliph defeats Manfroy at Velthomer. Julius joins the team, gets the Book of Naga, then she heads southwest to defeat Julius, and Seliph comes back to seize. Many units can get to level 30 by now, and all remaining funds goes towards repairing weapons, and there's no holding back. What's cool about the arena in this chapter is that the strongest arena fighters from both Generation 1 and 2 per chapter are in the arena. And check out Patty, actually swagging out with her promotion from all those villagers with extremely competent stats. It's too bad it's so late, but better late than never. Otherwise, buying some healing stats for units like Fi is a good idea, and any final preparations are made before setting out. There's no holding back in this chapter. Seliph will go at absolute full speed with no regard to experience, unless the team desperately needs it. What's interesting about this challenge is that if you've played more aggressive on turns earlier in the playthrough, and your team does need experience to get the final rank, this chapter does give you a ton of units that you can get experience on. But assuming we're playing aggressive, on turn 1 the southeastern dark mages are taken out, 2 of which have silent staves. Lelia can dance so that all of them can be taken out, and Leaf and Seliph can do the rescue strategy to let Seliph move east as far as possible. Sed and a few other units can go northwest to deal with the 4 mages here too. It's important to guard the northern barrier outside of Chalfie soon. By turn 3, Seliph can easily defeat Jufiel and seize Edda, which immediately despawns all of the Edda army. On the next turn, the team's sword fighters should be aligned at the northern army, and the other units should be working on defeating the northwestern mages. From Dozel comes Brian's southern army and Fisher's eastern army. The goal is to quickly seize Dozel with the rescue staff and moving Seliph west very swiftly. If things get dire and it takes a few extra turns, Charlo can always warp a unit to defend Edda in the east from Fisher. Brian is actually super dangerous. He has his grandfather Longbolt's Hell Swath and hits like a truck with huge attack power in pursuit, but the party pokes at enemies and makes way for Seliph. Then Lelia boosts his movement and he easily defeats Dagon and seizes Dozel. Alright, more than ever, it's time to slingshot Seliph all the way up to Frege. Almost everyone else on the team needs to retreat back to base and wait, and that's the end of most people's journey, which will make sense soon. But Ares will stay near Dozel, and Leaf, Lelia, and Seliph all head west. Fee also is very important for this section to go north. After some turns ferrying Seliph over, he can be placed right outside of Frege. After the enemies attack for a turn, he can fairly easily seize Frege. It's starting to become a theme. This chapter in particular places fairly easy Dark Mage enemies at the castles, and all of the nearby enemies just immediately evaporating when you seize a castle helps things keep moving real fast. Things start to get much more dangerous after Frege is captured. Belhalla sends out a ton of units, including Ishtar's army immediately approaching Frege. On the first turn, Seliph is going to go south while Fee goes north, and she's going to bait Ishtar's army out of the way entirely over the course of a few turns. During this time, Charlo can warp someone north to heal Seliph if he needs it, or Leaf can heal him if he has the right staves. The most dangerous part of this chapter is the 3 Pegasus Sisters section. That's right, in this game, the 3 Pegasus Sisters are enemies, and they are extraordinarily dangerous. They have critical, adept, pursuit, and to top it all off, nihil. Biggest issue is how Meng, the leader, comes with 4 authority stars, which boosts her and her allies' hit rate by 30%. The strategy is to stall with Ares as he guards Dozel, and other units can heal him with Physic if he needs, but it's dangerous and he can get killed. Ares will spend some turns baiting them south. The reason that Ares is chosen here is for his Missile Tain, because the sisters will attack him from a 2 range and hit his resistance stat since he can't counter with his 1 range weapon. Sed can get warped up there and possibly defeat them if they are separated, which is definitely preferable. Tinny can wield a Physic Staff, so if she can afford to buy Charlo's Physic Staff and Patty's Return Ring, Charlo can warp them to Dozel and she can heal them as an emergency. Altena needs to be guarding Chalfie around this time too, since Arion will be coming in hot from the east. Altena can very safely talk to Arion since he doesn't attack her, and these green units will follow her around, but they aren't very useful. Once Fee baits Ishtar's army to the north, Seliph can move very quickly to the east. The Deadlords, Julius's insanely cool battalion outside of Valhalla, will all move if Seliph is in range of Julius's meteor, but they'll back off if he gets out of range. Eventually, Seliph will run into Julia, who needs to be avoided. She's no danger to Seliph and will attack him, but the goal is to seize Velthomer so that the spell is broken on her, and then Julia needs to visit Velthomer. When approaching Velthomer, the guards will very nicely move if Seliph gets close, so he can swoop on in and defeat Manfroy. Manfroy is like the others and not very dangerous overall, although he is a little stronger. If he does activate the Adept skill, things can get roughed, but sometimes you just gotta go for it. Eventually, Julia makes her way to Seliph. Seliph talks to her, and Julia can go to Velthomer to get the Naga book, which is incredibly important. She can actually do the arena when she's there, and anyone else can sell her a ring from home base and she can buy it there. Getting a magic ring or a skill ring to her is a good idea. And yeah, the Book of Naga is a crazy good weapon. Look at her stats. It's time for the final stretch. Seliph will go ahead of Julia and try to bait the Deadlords to the west. If possible, Charlo can warp Nana to the north so that she can emergency heal. Seliph takes a turn or two to get them out of the way. Then Julia heads to the south and fends off any of the Deadlord remnants. Finally, she takes on Julius. Julius is a huge threat to most units with his skills like Pursuit and Wrath, but Julia is perfectly primed to fight him, and having her near or at max level makes this a much better time. Julius's Lopatur tome halves all units attack, except Julia's Book of Naga cancels this effect, and her tome has magic advantage against his Dark tome. She can possibly one-round him if she activates her Adept skill. With that, Seliph seizes and the game is won. We get a long credits sequence, see all the Generation 2 characters end up not being paired, and wrap up the whole thing. GG. As a note for this chapter, I showed off the aggressive version of the final chapter here. Like I mentioned before, if your units need experience and you have more turns to work with, you absolutely can spend more time in the final chapter ensuring that people get the levels they need for the ranking. Getting most units to level 30 is quite reasonable in Generation 2, but in Generation 1 it's a little harder, so you have to play flexibly. In the case of this video, I was short a few levels but had about 40 extra turns to work with, so the ending here is the result of a different playthrough of the final chapter where many strategies were the same, except for the first 10 turns or so, where fighting the large amount of enemies at the start yielded level ups for many members of the team. The split between Generation 1 and 2 on gaining levels is almost even, which rounds out to be about 500 levels per generation. For the turn counts, these estimates are for each chapter, which results in an A rank. You can see that some chapters are way higher than others, and remember that the goal is less than 400 turns for the whole game, averaging at about 33 turns a chapter. These are guidelines and the player will have to play flexibly, but it's mostly important to make sure that early chapters aren't slogs, then the player can play more aggressively later. And that's it. Learning this game thoroughly to come up with a feasible route that has some flexible strategies was extraordinarily fun. As of finishing this video, I still haven't gone and watched other strategies for this game, so I'm sure there's some stuff I missed. But doing it this way was very fun. I've been giving some thought to how challenges for older games like this go. In modern times, we come up with things like speedrunning and no damage challenges to push the limits of what the game can be, but I think in this case, the developers of the game came up with a very interesting ranking system. They very clearly thought about how difficult and challenging it would be to get the A rank, but also gave the players the tools to get to the A rank in their own way. And by really digging deep and looking at all the unique and interesting mechanics of this game, you really get the sense that they put a lot of time into creating both this game and the ranking system. Let's get a quick MVP section before we wrap it up. MVP for the whole game is obviously Seliph, but we all knew that. Other than Sigurd and Seliph, the competition is pretty high because there aren't any clear frontrunners and you can make arguments for a lot of units. For Generation 1, I give it to Lex. Lex's access to the Brave Axe for the majority of the generation plus his reliable defense sets him apart from the rest. Runner-ups would probably be Azel and Aaron. And for Generation 2, it's gotta be Fie. She's flying around from Chapter 6 until the end of the game doing very important things, and the runner-ups are Leaf and Ced. Thanks for watching. Fire Emblem 4 is a thorough and mechanically deep game, and it was real fun to spend a lot of time analyzing this game. If you want to see the live attempt at the run, please check out the video description for relevant links. See you next time.